The medical droid's scanner hummed over Clone Trooper 5's as he thrashed against the restraints, screaming about nightmares and conspiracies that would doom the Republic. In the sterile white corridors of the Coruscant Medical Facility, Commander Fox kept his blaster trained steady, while Anakin Skywalker and Captain Rex stood frozen in the doorway, their faces etched with horror and disbelief. "The Chancellor is behind it all," Fives gasped, his voice breaking as the sedatives began to take hold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his desperate features. His fingers clawed at the air, reaching toward Rex with the urgency of a drowning man. The conspiracy he'd uncovered went deeper than anyone could imagine. Rex stepped forward, his boots echoing against the polished floor, but Fox's weapon swung toward him in warning. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity before a storm. Behind them, Anakin's hand hovered near his lightsaber, the Force screaming danger in ways he couldn't yet understand. Every second that passed brought them closer to a truth that would shatter the galaxy. "Listen to me," Fives pleaded, his enhanced hearing picking up the distant footsteps of more security forces approaching. The inhibitor chip scar on his head throbbed with phantom pain. He'd removed the evidence, held the proof in his own hands, but now the weight of that knowledge crushed him like a vice. The nightmares that haunted every clone's sleep were more than dreams. The medical readouts flickered erratically as Fives fought against the sedatives, each heartbeat displayed in damning red spikes. His brothers were walking time bombs, programmed for betrayal, and only he knew the activation code that would turn them against everything they'd sworn to protect. Order 66 hung over them all like an executioner's blade, waiting for the moment to fall. The greatest army in the Republic's history had been compromised from its very first breath on Kamino. Through the observation window, shadows moved with deliberate purpose. The conspiracy reached into the highest levels of power, tendrils of deception wrapped around the very heart of democracy. Fives's discovery threatened to unravel years of careful planning, decades of manipulation that had shaped the Clone Wars from their inception. Someone had engineered this entire conflict, and that someone would stop at nothing to keep their secret buried alongside anyone who stumbled upon the truth. How did a simple clone trooper uncover the galaxy's darkest secret? And why did the very Republic he served orchestrate his execution? The answer lies buried beneath layers of deception so profound that even the Jedi Council never sensed the trap closing around them until those final, terrible moments. To understand the web of theories that explain the Clone Wars' true purpose, we need to explore 8 mind-bending possibilities that will forever change how you see this conflict. Starting with the theory that the Anakin Skywalker we know might not be Anakin at all. The lightsaber felt different in his hands after Zygeria Heavier somehow, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Ahsoka noticed it first during their sparring session aboard the Resolute, the way her master's stance had shifted, his footwork slightly off, like a musician playing a familiar song in the wrong key. The blue blade hummed through the air with its usual electric crackle, but the rhythm was wrong. Rex watched from the observation deck, his enhanced soldier's instincts screaming that something fundamental had changed about the general. The Zygerian slave empire mission had pushed them all to their limits, but Anakin's transformation went deeper than battle fatigue. His tactical decisions grew more aggressive, almost reckless, abandoning the careful strategies that had made him legendary among the 501st. During the briefing for their next campaign, Obi-Wan raised an eyebrow as Anakin proposed a frontal assault that would have made even the most aggressive ARC trooper pause. The holographic battle plans flickered between them, casting blue shadows that seemed to highlight the new hardness in Anakin's features. Clone officers began whispering in the mess halls about the general's changed demeanor. Where once he'd shared rations and war stories with his men, now he maintained a cold distance that chilled even battle-hardened veterans. The familiar warmth that had earned him the absolute loyalty of the 501st had been replaced by something darker, more driven. Fives himself had mentioned it to Echo before that final, fatal mission, how the general's presence in the Force felt fractured, like looking at a broken mirror that reflected something not quite right. The medical records from Kamino contained irregularities that most would dismiss as clerical errors. Anakin's height measurements fluctuated by millimeters between checkups, His retinal scans showed microscopic variations, and his midi-chlorian counts displayed subtle inconsistencies that made the medical droids recalibrate their instruments. The Kaminoans, masters of cloning technology, had documented these anomalies with their typical clinical detachment. Their classified reports, buried deep in encrypted files, suggested possibilities that would have sent shockwaves through the Jedi Council. Padmé felt the change most acutely during their stolen moments together on Coruscant. The apartment that had once echoed with laughter now hummed with an undercurrent of tension she couldn't name. His kisses carried a desperation that hadn't existed before, his embrace too tight, as if he feared she might disappear. The nightmares that plagued him spoke of memories that didn't align with the man she'd married. She'd wake to find him staring at his own hands in the moonlight, flexing fingers as if ensuring they still belonged to him. The theory emerged from the shadows of Republic intelligence, whispered by analysts who'd noticed patterns too precise to be coincidental. What if the Anakin Skywalker who'd returned from certain missions wasn't the same man who'd left? The Kaminoans had perfected human cloning to an art form, creating millions of identical soldiers from a single template. Creating a force-sensitive clone presented greater challenges, but not insurmountable ones. The degradation patterns in accelerated cloning might explain the subtle personality shifts, the growing instability, the way his connection to the Force seemed to flicker like a failing power cell. Consider the implications of replacing the Chosen One with a copy programmed for a darker purpose. The original Anakin's compassion and loyalty had made him resistant to certain influences, his love for Padmé and dedication to his men creating barriers against manipulation. A clone, however skillfully created, would lack those deep emotional foundations. The memories might be intact, downloaded through advanced neural mapping, but the soul behind them would be artificial. The Chancellor's private meetings with Anakin had increased dramatically after Zygeria, closed-door sessions that left even the Jedi Council uneasy. The 501st's combat records showed a disturbing trend after the supposed change. Casualty rates among clone units increased by 15% under Anakin's direct command, acceptable losses that the previous Anakin would have fought to prevent. His legendary ability to sense danger and protect his men seemed to falter at crucial moments. Rex found himself compensating for tactical decisions that felt alien to everything he'd learned fighting alongside his general. The force bond between master and apprentice that had allowed Ahsoka to sense Anakin across star systems now felt muffled, like trying to hear through thick transparent steel. Physical evidence mounted in small damning details. Security footage from the Jedi Temple showed minute variations in his gait, the way he held his lightsaber shifting by degrees that only careful analysis would reveal. His meditation patterns in the Room of 1,000 Fountains had changed, favoring positions the original Anakin had found uncomfortable. The temple guards, trained to notice the smallest irregularities, filed reports about the knight's altered presence. Their concerns vanished into bureaucratic channels that led directly to the Chancellor's office. The clone theory gained credibility when examining the timeline of Anakin's increasing darkness. Each mission to the Outer Rim coincided with personality shifts that pushed him further from the light. The original Anakin's DNA, secured during his first year as a Padawan, could have provided the template for multiple replacements. Advanced memory extraction technology, developed in secret facilities beyond Republic oversight, could transfer experiences while programming new directives. The perfect sleeper agent, wearing the face of the Republic's greatest hero while serving a master's hidden agenda. Ahsoka's departure from the Jedi Order had shattered something in her master, but the clone theory suggested a more sinister explanation. Her false accusation and trial had been orchestrated to remove the one person who knew Anakin well enough to spot an imposter. Without his Padawan's instinctive understanding of their Force bond, the replacement could operate more freely. The emotional devastation of her leaving provided perfect cover for any personality changes. Even Obi-Wan, consumed by his own duties and trusting in their brotherhood, missed the warning signs accumulating like storm clouds. The Kaminoan cloning process typically required years for a stable adult clone, but experimental procedures could accelerate growth at terrible cost. The cellular degradation from rapid development might manifest as physical pain, emotional instability, and eventual systemic failure. The suit that would eventually sustain Darth Vader wasn't just life support for injuries. It was designed to maintain a failing clone body pushed beyond its biological limits. Every breath through that mechanical respirator would be a reminder of the artificial nature of its wearer, a prison for a manufactured soul. Secret transmissions between Camino and Coruscant, encrypted with protocols known only to the highest security clearances, discussed Project Reflection in coded language. The few technicians who'd glimpsed these communications disappeared into early retirement or suffered convenient accidents. The cloning facilities dedicated to this project operated in sections of Tipoca City that didn't appear on any official schematics. Even the Kaminoan Prime Minister remained unaware of chambers where Force-sensitive genetic material was manipulated in ways that violated both Republic law and nature itself. The behavioral changes accelerated after each injury that required extended medical treatment. Battles that left Anakin unconscious for hours provided windows for replacement, his distinctive appearance making switches possible with advanced surgical precision. The original's memories could be extracted and updated, ensuring continuity that would fool even close associates. Each iteration grew darker, more susceptible to anger and fear. The emotional safeguards of the original gradually stripped away. The path to the dark side, engineered through genetic manipulation and psychological programming. Obi-Wan's growing concern manifested in subtle ways: longer meditation sessions, careful observation during council meetings, private consultations with Master Yoda about his former Padawan's transformation. The Force whispered warnings he couldn't quite interpret, danger signs obscured by the chaos of war and his trust in their bond. His reports to the Council noted Anakin's increasing aggression, but attributed it to the pressures of leadership. The possibility of replacement never occurred to him, because the very concept violated everything he believed about the uniqueness of a Force signature. But Force signatures could be mimicked, according to forbidden texts hidden in the deepest vaults of the Jedi archives. Ancient Sith experiments had explored the possibility of creating Force-sensitive beings, abominations that channeled power through artificial means. The Rule of Two had supposedly ended such practices, but the Clone Wars had resurrected many forgotten darknesses. A sufficiently advanced clone, enhanced with Sith alchemy and bleeding-edge science, might fool even a council of masters. The midi-chlorians could be transplanted, the connection to the Force artificially maintained through technologies that merged mysticism with genetic engineering. The missions where Anakin operated alone multiplied in the war's final year. Classified operations that sent him into enemy territory without backup. Each return brought subtle changes that accumulated like poison in the bloodstream. His report deliveries grew more mechanical, focusing on military objectives while omitting the human elements he'd once emphasized. The compassion that had defined him seemed to drain away mission by mission, replaced by a cold efficiency that pleased certain members of the military command. The Chancellor's influence grew stronger with each private meeting, finding purchase in a mind that might have been programmed for susceptibility. Rex noticed his generals changing combat preferences during the siege of Anaxes, where Anakin had once favored defensive strategies that minimized casualties. The new approach embraced acceptable losses with disturbing ease. The captain found himself arguing against plans that would have horrified the general he'd followed for years. Their Force-coordinated battle maneuvers, honed through countless engagements, now felt disconnected and forced. The trust between commander and soldier, built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice, eroded with each questionable order. The replacement theory explained discrepancies that had puzzled those closest to Anakin. His mechanical aptitude, legendary among the Jedi, seemed to fluctuate wildly. Some days he could repair a starfighter hyperdrive blindfolded. Others, he struggled with basic maintenance. His connection to R2-D2, deeper than most organics achieved with droids, occasionally faltered. The astromech's behavioral quirks around his master suggested the droid's advanced processors detected anomalies in biometric patterns. R2's encrypted memory banks, sealed even from Jedi technicians, might have contained proof that would shake the Republic's foundations. Padme's political instincts screamed warnings during their final months together. The man who'd sworn to protect democracy now spoke casually of the need for stronger leadership, centralized power, order imposed through strength. Their philosophical debates, once playful intellectual sparring, turned into genuine arguments that left her shaken. His views on the separatist crisis hardened beyond recognition, abandoning nuance for absolute positions. The gentle soul who'd freed slaves on Tatooine now discussed civilian casualties as strategic variables. The medical facilities beneath the Jedi Temple held secrets that few masters ever glimpsed. Sealed chambers, designed for unique force healing techniques, could theoretically house equipment for more sinister purposes. The Bacta tanks in the restricted sections ran on power sources independent of the temple's main grid. Security recordings from these areas suffered from convenient malfunctions during crucial timeframes. The few Padawans who'd accidentally wandered into restricted zones reported sensing wrongness in the Force, shadows that clung despite the illumination panels. Their concerns were dismissed as oversensitivity to the war's darkness. Each piece of evidence built toward an inescapable conclusion that reframed the entire Clone Wars. The conflict hadn't just been orchestrated to destroy the Jedi and Republic. It had been designed to replace key figures with programmed versions serving a hidden master. The army of clone troopers represented merely the visible aspect of a deeper cloning conspiracy. The inhibitor chips that would trigger Order 66 were just one layer of programming in a scheme that reached into the Jedi Order itself. The final year of the Clone Wars saw Anakin's transformations accelerate beyond previous patterns. His reporting style to the Jedi Council grew increasingly militaristic, focusing on efficiency over ethics. The passion that had once driven him to challenge unjust council decisions morphed into a cold resentment that calculated slights and remembered every perceived insult. Masters who'd known him since childhood exchanged worried glances as he delivered battlefield assessments with clinical detachment. The light in his eyes, that spark of defiance and hope that had marked him as special, dimmed with each passing month. But this theory, as compelling as its evidence might be, raised a question that chilled even hardened investigators to their core. If multiple clones had replaced Anakin throughout the war, each iteration darker than the last, then the final version that became Darth Vader was merely the last in a series. The suit that sustained him wasn't just life support, it was a containment system for an unstable clone body never meant to last. The original Anakin Skywalker, the slave boy from Tatooine who dreamed of freeing the galaxy, might have died years before Mustafa's lava sealed his fate. The implications reached beyond one man's transformation. If they could replace the Chosen One without detection, who else among the Republic's defenders had been substituted? The technology perfected on Anakin could have been deployed elsewhere, creating a shadow network of replacements in key positions. The Order 66 conspiracy might have been just one protocol among many, a visible atrocity to hide deeper manipulations. The entire command structure of the Republic military could have been compromised, flesh and blood leaders replaced with programmed duplicates serving a single master's will. But if this theory is true, what happened to the real Anakin Skywalker, and who made the decision to replace the Chosen One with manufactured copies designed to fall? The rain hammered against the transparisteel windows of Tipoca City as Jango Fett stood before the Kaminoan Prime Minister, his Mandalorian armor reflecting the sterile white lights of the cloning facility. 10 years of credits gleamed in the account transfer, enough to disappear forever, but the bounty hunter's terms remained non-negotiable. One unaltered clone, aging at a natural rate, to raise as his son. The genetic template for the greatest army in galactic history wanted something pure from this devil's bargain. Lama Su's elongated fingers danced across the holographic display, manipulating DNA sequences with an artist's precision. The Kaminoans had refined their craft over centuries, but this project pushed even their considerable expertise. Creating millions of identical soldiers from a single human template required modifications beyond simple replication. The inhibitor chips represented just one layer of programming in beings designed to think, feel, and die on command. Deep in the growth chambers, suspended in bubbling tanks of specialized nutrients, the first generation took shape. Their accelerated development compressed 20 years into 10, cells dividing at rates that would horrify conventional geneticists. The mechanical breathing of the life support systems created a rhythm, like a massive heartbeat. Each clone's brain developed with engineered precision, neural pathways carved by chemical cocktails that ensured obedience while maintaining the illusion of free will. Young Boba watched through the observation ports as his brothers grew in their artificial wombs. His father's hand rested heavy on his shoulder, a reminder of what separated him from the faces that would soon fill the galaxy's battlefields. The unaltered clone felt the weight of his uniqueness, the burden of being the only one who would know a father's love. Behind them, Kaminoan technicians monitored readouts that tracked everything from muscle density to synaptic response times. The first batch emerged from their tubes gasping and shaking, bodies that looked 20 years old, housing minds that had existed for half that time. Their identical brown eyes opened to a world of training simulations and combat drills, accepting their purpose with programmed certainty. The inhibitor chips hummed beneath their skulls. Bioorganic technology merged seamlessly with neural tissue. None questioned their purpose or origin. The genetic programming, as fundamental as their accelerated heartbeats. Combat training began before they could properly walk, muscle memory implanted through flash instruction, while their bodies struggled to match the knowledge. The Kaminoans observed every stumble and success, adjusting the formula for subsequent generations. Jango himself oversaw the most promising candidates, teaching them the Mandalorian combat forms that would make them legendary. His movements were precise and lethal, each lesson a piece of his legacy transmitted to beings who carried his face but would never share his freedom. Individual personalities emerged despite the genetic uniformity, like flowers pushing through permacrete. CT-7567 preferred long-range combat, spending hours perfecting his sniper breathing. CT-5555 showed unusual tactical creativity, earning early promotion to sergeant. Their trainers noted these variations with clinical interest. The Kaminoan files grew thick with observations about how identical genetic material could produce such diverse results. The mess halls echoed with thousands of identical voices sharing different stories. Clones compared training scores and swapped techniques, building the brotherhood that would carry them through hell. They gave each other names that the Kaminoans never used: Heavy for the trooper who favored heavy weapons, Echo for the one who repeated orders perfectly, Fives for his designation's distinctive pattern. These names became more real than their numbers, identity carved from uniformity through sheer force of personality. Dreams plagued them from the beginning, shared nightmares that rippled through entire barracks like psychic contagion. Visions of betrayal, of turning weapons on allies, of a moment when everything they believed would shatter. The Kaminoans dismissed these as side effects of accelerated growth, neural static from compressed development. Medical droids prescribed mild sedatives and logged the incidents in files marked for restricted access. Rex distinguished himself early through a combination of tactical brilliance and genuine care for his brothers. His training scores matched the best ARC troopers, but his leadership came from something deeper than programming. He learned each man's quirks, covered their weaknesses, amplified their strengths. The younger clones looked to him with trust that transcended rank. When the Jedi finally arrived to inspect their new army, Rex stood at attention with pride that felt earned rather than engineered. The inhibitor chips activated during routine training exercises, micro-seizures that lasted milliseconds and left no conscious memory. Each activation strengthened neural pathways that would one day override every oath and friendship. The clones continued their drills unaware that their brains were being rewired incident by incident. Kaminoan medical staff noted the activations in encrypted logs that uploaded directly to Coruscant. Fives and Echo became inseparable during advanced training, their complementary skills making them a devastating team. Fives pushed boundaries while Echo provided steady reliability, a partnership that survived their assignment to the doomed Rishi station. Their banter during long watches masked deeper conversations about purpose and identity. They wondered sometimes about the world beyond Kamino's eternal storms. Neither could have imagined that one day Fives would hold the truth about their creation in his trembling hands. The first deployment of the clone army at Geonosis shattered any illusions about their purpose. Thousands died in the red dust, identical faces frozen in final expressions of pain and determination. Those who survived carried the weight of seeing themselves die repeatedly, a unique trauma no other soldiers endured. The Jedi generals they'd been created to serve proved fallible, leading charges that left valleys carpeted with white armor. Yet the clones followed orders with dedication that surprised even their creators. Individual clones began developing quirks that went beyond personality into physical expression. Some grew their hair within regulation limits, others added subtle armor modifications that commanding officers tolerated. Tattoos appeared, officially discouraged but privately accepted as harmless morale boosters. Each mark of individuality was a small rebellion against their manufactured nature. The Kaminoans documented these variations with the detached interest of scientists studying an unexpected mutation. The longer clones served, the stronger their individual consciousness grew. Veterans like Rex and Cody developed command styles as distinctive as any naturally born officer. They learned to read their Jedi generals, compensating for weaknesses and amplifying strengths. The partnership between clone and Jedi became more than programmed loyalty. Real friendships formed in the crucible of war, bonds that would make the inevitable betrayal cut even deeper. Domino Squad's struggles during training highlighted the paradox of clone development. Genetically identical beings who couldn't synchronize, their personalities clashing despite sharing the same DNA. Heavy's sacrifice on the Rishi moon proved that programming couldn't predict heroism. His choice to destroy the station rather than let it fall to separatist hands came from something beyond genetic engineering. The memorial his brothers held featured no Kaminoan observers, no data collection, just soldiers honoring a fallen comrade. The inhibitor chip's true purpose remained hidden behind layers of medical terminology and security classifications. Routine scans showed them as tumor prevention devices, a necessity for accelerated aging. Clone medics accepted this explanation without question, the programming ensuring they wouldn't probe deeper. The few who experienced malfunctions found themselves in Kaminoan medical facilities before they could voice concerns. Their brothers never saw them again, casualties of a war that consumed its soldiers in ways both visible and hidden. Night terrors increased as the war progressed, entire battalions waking in cold sweats from dreams they couldn't quite remember. The shared nature of these nightmares created a psychic bond between units, unspoken understanding of fears that had no conscious source. Meditation techniques learned from Jedi generals provided temporary relief but couldn't touch the programmed roots. The inhibitor chips pulsed with each nightmare, strengthening pathways that would soon activate. Some clones developed interests beyond warfare that surprised everyone, including themselves. One became an amateur poet, scratching verses on armor pieces during quiet moments. Another learned to play a battered instrument salvaged from a battlefield, filling empty hours with melodies that made his brothers pause. These glimpses of what they might have been in another life made their engineered fate even more tragic. The Kaminoans noted these developments but made no moves to suppress them. Emotional range, even unexpected artistic expression, fell within acceptable parameters. The ARC Trooper program pushed genetic potential to its limits, creating soldiers who operated with near-complete independence. Alpha-class ARCs like Fordo demonstrated that clone consciousness could match any natural-born warrior. Their successful missions proved that programmed beings could exceed their parameters through will and determination. Yet even these elite soldiers carried inhibitor chips, ticking time bombs that would override their hard-won autonomy. Clone solidarity became legendary throughout the Republic military. Where other armies dealt with internal conflicts and competing loyalties, clones stood united. They covered for each other's mistakes, shared resources without question, faced death together with a bond deeper than brotherhood. This unity made them the perfect army, but also highlighted the tragedy of their creation. Beings capable of such loyalty deserved better than the fate encoded in their cells. The rare interactions between clones and civilian populations revealed how complete their isolation was. Children stared at identical faces in wonder, while adults felt unsettled by the uniformity. Clones learned to navigate these encounters with practiced ease, developing social skills never covered in training. Some found brief connections that hinted at lives they'd never lead. The program discouraged such interactions but couldn't entirely prevent them. Human nature persisted despite genetic engineering. Medical examinations revealed the toll of accelerated aging as the war dragged on. 3-year veterans showed physical degradation equivalent to decades of natural life. Their enhanced metabolisms that allowed rapid healing also burned through cellular resources at unstable rates. The Kaminoans had always known this limitation but considered it acceptable for disposable soldiers. Clone medics treating their brothers saw the future written in greying hair and deepening lines, a short life spent entirely in service. The most experienced clones developed an almost supernatural ability to predict each other's actions in battle. Squads moved with synchronized precision that went beyond training into something approaching hive consciousness. Yet this connection never overrode individual choice, each clone making personal decisions within the group dynamic. The inhibitor chips monitored these connections, ready to exploit them when the time came. Psychological evaluations filed by Republic medical staff painted a complex picture of clone mental health. Despite their programming, many developed anxiety disorders, depression, and post-traumatic stress. The constant exposure to death, particularly their own death, repeated across countless brothers created unique psychological pressures. Treatment remained basic, focused on maintaining combat effectiveness rather than genuine healing. The clones themselves developed informal support networks, understanding that only they could truly comprehend their shared burden. The discovery of conspiracy within clone ranks sent shockwaves through command structures. When Sergeant Slick betrayed his unit on Christophsis, it proved that even programmed loyalty had limits. His reasoning, that clones were slaves fighting for a republic that saw them as property, struck uncomfortably close to truth. The incident was suppressed, but whispers spread through the ranks. Some clones began questioning their purpose in quiet moments, though the inhibitor chips ensured these doubts never crystallized into action. Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch, represented genetic deviation taken to extremes. Their mutations should have been terminated by Kaminoan standards, yet they survived to become the Republic's most unusual asset. Hunter's enhanced senses, Wrecker's strength, Tech's intelligence, and Crosshair's perfect aim proved that imperfection could create superior soldiers. Their existence challenged everything the Kaminoans believed about genetic uniformity. More disturbing to their creators, they showed stronger resistance to standard behavioral programming. The war's progression saw clones developing increasingly complex emotional responses to their Jedi generals. Some formed attachments that resembled familial bonds, looking to their commanders as father figures their genetics never provided. Others harbored hidden resentments about casualty rates and tactical decisions. The inhibitor chips recorded these emotional fluctuations, algorithms calculating optimal activation timing, the perfect moment to turn love into violence, loyalty into betrayal. Combat stress manifested in ways the Kaminoans hadn't anticipated. Some clones developed elaborate pre-battle rituals, others kept totems from fallen brothers. Survivor's guilt plagued veterans who'd watched entire units of their genetic twins die. The mechanical nature of their creation clashed with very human responses to trauma. Medical facilities overflowed with cases that challenged the boundaries between programmed behavior and authentic emotion. The 501st Legion under Anakin Skywalker developed a reputation that transcended typical clone capabilities. Their success rate defied statistical probability, leading to theories about Force influence on genetic programming. Rex's leadership, combined with Skywalker's unorthodox tactics, created soldiers who thought creatively within their constraints. The Legion's loyalty to their general went beyond programming into genuine devotion. This bond would make their eventual betrayal under Order 66 even more devastating. Clone culture evolved despite efforts to suppress it. They developed their own slang, mixing Mandoa learned from training with battlefield terminology. Inside, jokes spread across star systems as units rotated. The paint designs on armor became increasingly elaborate, each pattern telling stories of battles survived and brothers lost. The Kaminoans observed this cultural development with scientific fascination programmed beings, creating authentic traditions. Some clones showed disturbing awareness of their inhibitor chips without understanding their purpose. Headaches during certain transmissions, momentary blackouts after specific code phrases, dreams of violence against Jedi that felt too real. Medical complaints were noted and dismissed, the symptoms too close to classified truth. Tup's breakdown would later reveal what happened when a chip malfunctioned, but warning signs had appeared throughout the clone ranks for years. The relationship between clones and their training sergeants created unexpected dynamics. Sergeants like 99, deemed unfit for combat due to genetic defects, became emotional anchors for their able-bodied brothers. His death defending Kamino hit the clones harder than many battlefield losses. It proved that even those considered failures by Kaminoan standards could display heroism that transcended their programming. The cloners noted this anomaly, but failed to grasp its significance. As the war entered its final phases, veteran clones showed increasing signs of independent thought. They questioned orders more frequently, requiring explanation rather than blind obedience. Some developed philosophical perspectives on their existence that would have alarmed their creators. The balance between effective soldiers and thinking beings tilted dangerously toward consciousness. The inhibitor chip's activation became not just strategic necessity but essential to prevent widespread awakening. The tragic irony of clone existence crystallized in moments of genuine happiness. Celebrations after successful missions, quiet conversations during hyperspace jumps, the simple pleasure of removing helmets after long battles. These glimpses of normal life highlighted what they'd been denied. Every laugh shared between brothers carried the weight of their engineered fate. The inhibitor chips recorded these moments too, algorithms noting emotional peaks that could be exploited. Commander Wolf's cybernetic eye replacement following a duel with Ventress represented more than medical necessity. The prosthetic gave him vision beyond human normal, but also constant headaches that clone medics couldn't explain. The interaction between cybernetics and inhibitor chips created feedback loops that occasionally glimpsed future programming. His growing paranoia about conspiracy within the Republic wasn't madness, but subconscious awareness of the betrayal encoded in his brain. The Senate's debates about clone rights revealed the Republic's fundamental hypocrisy. Beings created to die for democracy were denied its basic protections. Some senators argued for recognition of clone personhood. Others insisted they were military equipment. The clones themselves weren't consulted, their opinions considered irrelevant to their own fate. This political indifference made their loyalty even more tragic. They fought for a system that refused to acknowledge their humanity. Training new clone batches became increasingly difficult as the war progressed. Veteran instructors couldn't hide their trauma from cadets who wore their faces. The bright enthusiasm of fresh troops contrasted painfully with the hollow eyes of survivors. Yet the training continued, production lines churning out soldiers for a conflict designed to consume them. Each graduation ceremony sent more beings into a war where their deaths were scripted from conception. The occasional defection of clones to separatist forces created existential crises within Republic ranks. These traitors proved that programming could be overcome, free will asserted despite genetic constraints. Their brothers hunted them with dedication that masked deeper questions. If one clone could choose differently, what did that mean for the rest? The inhibitor chips ensured these philosophical concerns never evolved beyond abstract worry. Clone medics developed expertise in treating injuries unique to their engineered physiology. Accelerated healing required different protocols, medications calibrated for enhanced metabolisms. They became brilliant trauma surgeons by necessity, saving brothers who would return to battle within days. The psychological toll of repeatedly saving the same face wore on even the most dedicated medics. Their medical logs contained poetry between clinical notes, attempts to process the surreal nature of their existence. The discovery of ancient Mandalorian traditions among some clone units added layers to their cultural development. Despite Jango Fett's complicated relationship with his heritage, traces of Mandalore survived in training programs. Clones adapted these warrior traditions to their own needs, creating bonds that transcended genetic programming. The Kaminoans hadn't anticipated this cultural inheritance, another variable in beings they'd thought entirely predictable. Rare moments of clone interaction with Force-sensitive individuals outside the Jedi Order revealed interesting anomalies. Some clones showed microsensitivities that registered on specialized equipment, traces of connection that shouldn't exist in engineered beings. These incidents were classified above even standard inhibitor chip documentation. The possibility that consciousness itself could generate force connections challenged fundamental assumptions about clone limitations. The progression from mindless obedience to genuine tactical innovation marked the clone army's evolution. Battles that should have been losses turned to victories through creative thinking that surpassed programming parameters. Clones developed strategies their trainers never taught, adapted to situations their creators never imagined. This growth made them the galaxy's most effective military force, while simultaneously proving they'd transcended their original purpose. As Fives would eventually discover, the inhibitor chips weren't just failsafes, they were ticking time bombs designed to shatter every bond, betray every trust, and transform the Republic's protectors into its executioners. The greatest cruelty wasn't their programmed death, but the consciousness they'd developed along the way, awareness that would make their final betrayal a wound that would never heal. Yoda's ears twitched as young Ahsoka entered the council chamber, and for a moment he saw not a Padawan, but a survivor walking among ghosts. The Force swirled around her in patterns that made even the ancient master pause in his meditation, visions of possible futures cascading through his consciousness like waterfalls of light and shadow. The other council members continued their debate about troop deployments, unaware that 900 years of Jedi wisdom was processing revelations that would haunt Yoda until his final days on Dagobah. Ahsoka's presence burned bright in the Force, but beneath that brightness lurked something else entirely, threads of destiny that led away from the temple, away from the Order, into survival when all others would fall. The meditation chambers deep within the temple held secrets that few Jedi ever glimpsed, and Yoda spent increasing hours in their depths as the war progressed. His gnarled fingers gripped his Geimer stick as visions assaulted him with growing intensity, each meditation session revealing new facets of a future too terrible to accept. The Force showed him temple halls running red, younglings cowering in the council chambers, and through it all, a single Togruta walking paths no other Jedi would survive. The ancient master's breathing grew ragged as he witnessed Order 66 from 1,000 angles, but always the visions returned to Ahsoka alive, alone, carrying the Order's legacy in ways the Council could never approve. During Council meetings, Yoda's attention often drifted to Skywalker's young apprentice with an intensity that made other masters uncomfortable. Where they saw impulsiveness and attachment that needed correction, he glimpsed something far more complex, a Jedi whose very flaws would become her salvation. His interventions in her training grew more frequent, subtle guidance that pushed her toward independence rather than conformity. Each lesson contained layers within layers, preparing her for a galaxy where traditional Jedi wisdom would mean death. The Force visions grew more specific during his deepest meditations, showing him exact moments where fate would pivot on narrow hinges. He watched Ahsoka face the Council during her trial, saw the betrayal in her eyes as the Order she'd devoted her life to abandoned her, felt the crushing weight of her decision to walk away. But beyond that moment of apparent failure, the visions revealed triumph. She would live precisely because she left, her departure saving her from the fate that awaited every other Jedi. The ancient master's heart ached with knowledge he couldn't share, wisdom that would sound like madness if spoken aloud. Late-night training sessions in the Room of 1,000 Fountains became Yoda's preferred method of subtle intervention. He would appear seemingly by chance when Ahsoka practiced alone, offering cryptic advice that felt random but carried desperate purpose. His lessons focused on survival over tradition, adaptation over rigid adherence to rules, trusting instincts when the Order itself became unreliable. She absorbed these teachings with the enthusiasm of youth, never realizing her Grandmaster was preparing her for apostasy. The specific moment of her greatest trial blazed across his visions with painful clarity, standing before the Council, accused of bombing the temple, abandoned by everyone except Anakin. Yoda saw himself in that future moment, bound by politics and circumstance to participate in the very betrayal that would save her life. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. By failing her in that crucial moment, the Council would grant her freedom from their own doom. His aged heart carried this burden through every interaction. Each kind word to young Ahsoka weighted with foreknowledge of necessary betrayal. Other Council members noticed his unusual interest but misinterpreted its source, assuming the ancient master saw great potential in Skywalker's apprentice. They couldn't perceive the shadow of Order 66 that clung to every vision, the way Yoda's Force sight overlaid present moments with future horror. When Ahsoka demonstrated new techniques in training, he saw her using those same skills to survive Imperial purges. Her laughter in the temple halls echoed with the ghost of silence that would soon consume these spaces forever. The war itself seemed designed to forge her into something beyond traditional Jedi expectations. Each mission, alongside Anakin, pushed her toward independence, teaching her to think beyond council wisdom when survival demanded it. Yoda influenced these assignments subtly, ensuring she gained experience that would serve her in the dark times ahead. Combat scenarios that other Padawans would never face became her regular routine, preparing reflexes and instincts for battles against former allies. His private journals, written in ancient languages only he still understood, documented the visions with painful precision. Page after page described variations of the same devastating future: the temple burning, clones turning on their generals, younglings slaughtered by one they trusted above all others. But threading through these nightmares like silver hope came images of Ahsoka's survival, her path diverging from traditional Jedi ways into something new. The entries grew more frantic as her trial approached, his usually neat script degrading into barely legible scratches. Sleep became Yoda's enemy as visions invaded even his resting hours, forcing him to relive future tragedies in endless variation. He saw Ahsoka's lightsabers ignite in darkness years after the Empire's rise, watched her train beings who weren't quite Jedi, but carried the light nonetheless, felt her presence in the Force like a hidden flame keeping hope alive. These glimpses of distant futures sustained him through council meetings where he played his role in the very system that would doom them all. The other masters worried about his increasing fatigue, never guessing that he carried the weight of their future deaths in every breath. Training duels between Ahsoka and other Padawans drew his particular attention, each match revealing skills that would prove crucial to her survival. Where others saw mere talent, he recognized the foundation of abilities that would let her face Inquisitors and emerge victorious. Her dual-wielding technique, initially discouraged by traditionalists, received his subtle support. 2 blades would serve her better than 1 when former friends became enemies. Every advancement in her combat abilities was another step towards surviving the unsurvivable. The bond between Ahsoka and Anakin presented the greatest danger and opportunity in equal measure. Yoda watched their training sessions with eyes that saw multiple timelines overlapping, witnessed how their connection would both doom and save her. Anakin's attachment would make him fight desperately to prove her innocence during the trial, but that same attachment would ensure she was far from him when he became Vader. The Force moved in patterns too complex for most to perceive, but 9 centuries of experience let Yoda trace threads of causality that led to her unique survival. Conversations with other council members about Ahsoka's future took on painful dramatic irony that only he could appreciate. They discussed her potential, debated whether her attachment to Skywalker was too strong, worried about her impulsive nature, all while Yoda knew these very traits would preserve her when Orthodox Jedi fell. He guided these discussions carefully, preventing interventions that might alter her path towards survival. Each word was calculated to maintain the trajectory that would lead her away from the temple before the killing began. The Jedi archives held prophecies that most considered obsolete, but Yoda found himself returning to them with increasing frequency. Ancient texts spoke of the Order's destruction and rebirth, of knowledge preserved by those who walked away from tradition. The descriptions matched his visions of Ahsoka's future too precisely for comfort. She would become something the old masters never envisioned, a Jedi without the Order, light without the temple, hope without the structures that had defined Force users for millennia. Her growing independence during missions sent ripples through the Force that only he could fully interpret. Each decision to trust her own judgment over council directive, every moment of creative thinking that bent traditional rules, added another layer of protection against the coming storm. Yoda encouraged these small rebellions through calculated inaction, allowing her to develop instincts that orthodoxy would have crushed. The other masters saw concerning signs that needed correction. He saw survival skills taking root. Moments of pure clarity struck during his deepest meditations, visions so vivid they felt like memories rather than prophecy. He stood in a snow-covered forest years in the future, watching an adult Ahsoka train a young boy who blazed with untapped potential. Her teaching methods blended Jedi wisdom with hard-earned pragmatism, creating something new from the ashes of the old. The scene shifted to show her facing Vader himself, not with hatred but with profound sadness for the master she'd lost. These glimpses of her future role in the galaxy's salvation made his present burden bearable. The approaching trial loomed in his visions like a storm system on weather sensors, inevitable and necessary despite the pain it would cause. He watched himself participate in the Council's failure, saw the exact words each member would speak, felt Ahsoka's devastation as clearly as if it were his own. Yet changing this course would trap her in the temple when Order 66 activated, would see her fall beside masters who'd failed her. The cruelest mercy was allowing injustice to drive her away from certain death. Meditation sessions in the weeks before her trial grew so intense that other Jedi felt disturbances in the Force around Yoda's chambers. His connection to future events strengthened until past and present blurred together, conversations happening simultaneously across decades. He spoke to phantoms of dead Jedi while sitting in council meetings, responded to questions from futures that might never exist. The strain of carrying temporal knowledge wore on his ancient body, but he persisted in gathering every detail that might help Ahsoka survive. Her combat skills evolved rapidly under the pressure of constant warfare, exceeding what most Padawans achieved before knighthood. Yoda observed with satisfaction tinged by sorrow as she developed the precise abilities his visions showed her needing. The way she moved in battle already carried hints of the warrior she would become: fluid, adaptive, trusting instinct over rigid form. Each mission report that crossed the Council's attention revealed another step toward the fighter who would preserve Jedi knowledge through the dark times. Private conversations with Ahsoka took on layered meanings that would only become clear in retrospect. His seemingly random stories about ancient Jedi who survived purges, his emphasis on how knowledge could be preserved outside traditional structures, his gentle suggestions about trusting her own path, all were seeds planted for a future she couldn't yet imagine. She listened with respectful attention, filing away wisdom that would save her life when the moment demanded it. The Force itself seemed to bend around her during this period, creating opportunities for growth and independence that defied probability. Missions that should have been routine became complex moral challenges requiring creative solutions. Assignments meant for senior Padawans fell to her through mysterious bureaucratic errors. Yoda recognized the hand of destiny in these patterns, the living force preparing its chosen survivor through trials that built strength and self-reliance. His interactions with Anakin during this time carried their own burden of foreknowledge, watching the chosen one's growing darkness while knowing it would catalyze Ahsoka's salvation. Every council criticism of Skywalker's attachment to his Padawan made Yoda wince internally, understanding that this very attachment would ensure she lived when others died. The future Vader's rage at losing her would keep him from hunting her with the dedication he showed toward other survivors. Love would become shield through its very transformation into loss. Dreams and visions merged until Yoda could barely distinguish waking meditation from Force-granted prophecy. He walked through possible futures like a tourist in time, observing variations where Ahsoka died with the Order, others where she never left but became something darker, timelines where her survival changed nothing. But always the Force returned him to the primary path. She would leave, she would live, she would preserve what others thought lost forever. The bombing of the temple hangar sent shockwaves through his visions, confirmation that the crucial moment approached with inexorable certainty. He felt the Force trembling with potential futures collapsing into a single path, watched probability crystallize into inevitability. The Council would fail her, she would walk away, and in that failure lay the seeds of eventual victory against the darkness. His role in the coming betrayal was fixed, a player in a drama whose script was written in the Force itself. Observing her interactions with clone troopers revealed another layer of tragic necessity in her departure. The bonds she'd formed with Rex and others ran deep, connections that would have made Order 66's betrayal even more devastating. By leaving before that moment, she would be spared the unique agony of watching beloved allies become executioners. The clones themselves would be spared the burden of her death on their controlled hands. Even in betrayal, the Force showed mercy through careful timing. The final days before her trial blurred together in a haze of desperate meditation and careful maneuvering. Yoda positioned himself to ensure events unfolded as his visions demanded, each small action calculated to maintain the timeline that led to her survival. He suppressed evidence that might have swayed the council, remained silent when words could have changed minds, played his part in the injustice that would save her life. As the council delivered their verdict and Ahsoka made her fateful choice to leave the Order, Yoda felt the Force shift around them like tectonic plates realigning. The future solidified from possibility into certainty. She would live, carry their legacy, become something greater than the Order that failed her. The pain in her eyes as she walked away carved itself into his memory, joining the catalogue of necessary cruelties that paved the road to eventual hope. But the most chilling vision came in those final moments, a glimpse of understanding that froze even his ancient blood. The ancient Jedi Master knew she would outlive them all. Hunter felt the vibration in the air before the blast came, not through his enhanced senses, but through something deeper. The Havoc Marauder's hull groaned under enemy fire as Clone Force 99 executed another impossible mission, their mutations making them legends among the regular troops. Tech's fingers flew across his datapad, calculating trajectories that normal minds couldn't process, while Wrecker laughed as he hefted ordnance that would crush standard clones. Crosshair's rifle never missed, each shot guided by precision that transcended mere marksmanship. The Bad Batch moved through battlefields like ghosts given flesh, their abilities defying every parameter the Kaminoans had established for clone limitations. The sterile laboratories of Tipoca City held records that most cloners preferred to forget, failed experiments that should have been terminated at the embryonic stage. Hunter's enhanced tracking abilities registered on no standard genetic markers, his capacity to sense electromagnetic fields emerging from mutations the Kaminoans couldn't explain. The chief medical officer had wanted to dissect him as a cadet, to understand how damaged genes had produced enhancement rather than disability. But Nala Se had intervened, recognizing potential in what others saw as corruption. The Bad Batch survived their childhood through a combination of raw talent and political maneuvering that kept them from the recycling vats. Wrecker's strength came with a price the others rarely discussed, headaches that left him whimpering in the Marauder's bunks when he thought no one could hear. His massive frame resulted from cellular mutations that pushed biological limits, muscles denser than any human physiology should support. The pain behind his enthusiastic destruction hinted at deeper instabilities, neural pathways that fired wrong when stressed. Tech monitored his brother's vital signs with obsessive precision, tracking degradation patterns that resembled no known clone conditions. Their medical files grew thicker with each mission, anomalies that defied classification multiplying like cancer cells. Tech's hyperintelligence manifested in ways that disturbed even veteran Kaminoan geneticists who thought they understood the boundaries of enhanced cognition. His mind processed information at speeds that should have caused catastrophic neural burnout, synapses firing in patterns that resembled computer algorithms more than organic thought. During quiet moments between missions, he would stare at walls covered in equations only he could understand, muttering about connections that made Crosshair reach for sedatives. The inhibitor chip in his skull showed unusual formations on every scan, neural tissue growing around it in configurations that resembled crystalline structures. His brothers had learned to trust his impossible calculations, even when logic screamed they were wrong. Crosshair's perfect accuracy came from more than steady hands and sharp eyes, though he would die before admitting what he felt when lining up shots. Time seemed to slow in those moments before firing, the world crystallizing into probability streams he could navigate without conscious thought. His mutations had created something beyond enhanced vision, a perception that bordered on precognition. The Kaminoan's tests had revealed irregularities in his temporal lobe that shouldn't have been compatible with life, yet somehow granted him abilities that made other snipers look like children with toy weapons. Each perfect shot deepened the cold that had settled into his bones since childhood, isolation that came from seeing too clearly. Regular clones watched the Bad Batch with a mixture of awe and unease, recognizing something fundamentally different about their mutated brothers. The 99 designation had originally been mockery, referencing the malformed maintenance clone who died defending Camino. But Hunter's squad had transformed the insult into honor, carrying 99's memory in every impossible mission they completed. Their success rate defied statistical probability to such extremes that Republic intelligence had launched 3 separate investigations. Each inquiry concluded with classified files that asked questions the military preferred not to answer. The mutations that made them effective also created resistances that worried their handlers, starting with their response to standard conditioning protocols. Where regular clones accepted orders with programmed certainty, the Bad Batch questioned everything, their altered neural patterns creating gaps in behavioral modification. Hunter's enhanced senses picked up ultrasonic frequencies used in standard clone conditioning, allowing him to recognize and resist them. The squad's bunks on Kamino had been specially shielded after Tech discovered and disabled 17 different subliminal transmission systems. Their independence went deeper than personality quirks into fundamental resistance to control mechanisms. Missions that would have killed regular clone units became routine for Clone Force 99, their mutations allowing survival in conditions that defied human endurance. They'd walk through radiation that should have cooked them alive. Tech's calculations revealing that their cellular structures processed energy differently than baseline humans. Wrecker had survived direct hits that would have vaporized normal soldiers, his mutated tissue somehow dispersing kinetic energy across impossible surface areas. Each survival added new data points to Kaminoan studies that grew increasingly frantic. The possibility that their mutations might be replicable drove secret experiments that produced only corpses. Echo's addition to the team had created new dynamics that even Tech struggled to quantify. The former ARC troopers' cybernetic modifications interacting with their mutations in unexpected ways. His ability to interface directly with separatist systems went beyond mere technological enhancement, as if his consciousness could flow through circuits like water. The Techno-Union's experiments had awakened something that registered on instruments designed to detect force sensitivity. Hunter noticed how Echo's presence changed the squad's performance metrics, their already impossible success rate climbing even higher. The synergy between organic mutation and cybernetic enhancement created capabilities that challenged definitions of human limitation. Omega's existence shattered every assumption about clone development, a female clone whose creation violated fundamental Kaminoan principles. Her appearance at the end of the war raised questions about how many other secret variations might exist, hidden in laboratories even the Prime Minister didn't know about. The Bad Batch's immediate recognition of her as family transcended genetic similarity, Hunter's senses detecting something in her that resonated with their own mutations. She represented evolution beyond even their extreme variations, possibilities that made regular clones seem like rough drafts. The files documenting her creation would have started wars within wars if they'd been discovered. Their missions into separatist territory revealed disturbing parallels between their abilities and reports of force-sensitive individuals, though none of them would accept such comparisons. Hunter tracked targets through methods that resembled Jedi hunting techniques, following disturbances in electromagnetic fields that correlated with life signs. Wrecker's battle fury sometimes manifested as an almost visible aura that Tech's instruments couldn't explain. Crosshair's shots curved in ways that violated physics unless one accounted for subconscious force manipulation. The Kaminoans had documented these anomalies without understanding their implications, missing connections that would have revolutionized their cloning programs. Nightmares plagued the Bad Batch with different intensity than regular clones, their dreams featuring distortions that reflected their mutations. Hunter dreamed of sensing everything at once, until stimulation overload drove him to madness. Tech's nightmares involved his mind accelerating beyond control, thoughts fragmenting into infinite calculations that solved nothing. Wrecker saw himself growing larger until his body collapsed under its own mass, strength becoming self-destruction. Crosshair's dreams showed him shooting targets that turned out to be brothers. Perfect accuracy turned against everything he protected. These visions felt less like anxiety and more like glimpses of potential futures. The inhibitor chips in their skulls showed variations that concerned every medical technician who examined them, neural growth patterns that didn't match any standard models. Where regular clones' chips integrated seamlessly with brain tissue, the Bad Batch's mutations had created unusual interfaces. Scar tissue surrounded the implants in patterns suggesting rejection, yet the chips remained functional according to every diagnostic. Tech had theories about their mutations providing partial immunity to certain control protocols, hypotheses he shared only with Hunter during encrypted communications. The possibility that they might resist Order 66 when it came remained unspoken but understood. Combat footage of Clone Force 99 in action defied analysis, their coordinated movements resembling choreographed dance more than military tactics. They flowed around each other without verbal communication, each member knowing exactly where the others would be. Hunter's hand signals had evolved into a complex language that incorporated electromagnetic pulses only they could perceive. Regular clones attempting to work with them reported feeling like outsiders watching a hive mind operate. The connection between squad members transcended training into something that made Jedi battle meditation look crude. Kaminoan attempts to replicate their mutations had produced only failures, clone fetuses that died in development or emerged too damaged to survive. The specific combination of genetic damage that created enhancement rather than disability couldn't be artificially induced. Each member of the Bad Batch represented a unique accident that science couldn't reproduce. Nala Se's private research suggested that consciousness itself played a role in their development, will to survive transforming mutation into evolution. Her reports disappeared into classified archives that would later burn with Tipoca City. The psychological profiles of Clone Force 99 revealed personalities that had developed beyond standard clone parameters in ways that troubled Republic psychiatrists. Hunter's protective instincts extended beyond military objectives into genuine paternal behavior. Tech's intelligence had evolved its own ethical framework that sometimes conflicted with orders. Wrecker's childlike enthusiasm masked sophisticated emotional intelligence that allowed him to maintain morale under impossible conditions. Crosshair's cold precision came paired with loyalty so intense it resembled religious devotion. These weren't just enhanced soldiers but individuals whose mutations had freed them from psychological constraints. Mission reports featuring the Bad Batch often required heavy redaction before filing, their methods too unorthodox for standard military documentation. They'd completed objectives using approaches that violated 17 different tactical manuals, succeeding through abilities that couldn't be taught or replicated. Republic High Command had learned to simply point them at problems and accept that solutions would emerge through processes best left unexamined. The squad's handler had suffered 3 nervous breakdowns trying to write procedures around their capabilities. Their existence proved that the most effective weapons were often the ones that couldn't be controlled. Interactions between the Bad Batch and regular clone units revealed fundamental differences in how they processed their identity and purpose. Where standard clones found comfort in uniformity, the mutations had forced individual identity from birth. They'd never experienced the belonging that came from seeing your face reflected in thousands of brothers. This isolation had forged bonds within the squad that ran deeper than genetic similarity. They'd created family from shared strangeness, loyalty born from mutual understanding that no one else could provide. The Republic's files on Force-sensitive clones had been sealed at the highest levels, but Tech's slicing skills had uncovered fragments that painted disturbing pictures. Previous attempts to create Force-capable clones had resulted in subjects who self-terminated through abilities they couldn't control. The midi-chlorian counts required for Force sensitivity seemed incompatible with cloning technology, creating cascading failures that destroyed subjects from within. Yet the Bad Batch exhibited abilities that bordered on Force use without the cellular markers that should have accompanied them. Their mutations had achieved through accident what deliberate experimentation couldn't produce. Hunter's tactical precognition during battles went beyond enhanced senses into territory that made Jedi generals uncomfortable, predicting enemy movements through methods he couldn't articulate. His post-mission reports described feeling the shape of battles before they unfolded, sensing pressure points where single actions would cascade into victory. These insights came with splitting headaches that left him vomiting in private, his mutations extracting prices the others rarely saw. The electromagnetic sensitivity that made him invaluable also meant living in constant sensory overload that would have driven normal humans insane. Their survival rate on missions deemed suicidal by standard calculations had attracted attention from sources beyond military command, including Jedi investigators curious about statistical anomalies. Master Shakti had observed them during training exercises, her reports noting energy patterns around the squad that resembled Force phenomena. The Council had declined to investigate further, perhaps sensing truths they weren't prepared to confront. The possibility that cloning technology could accidentally produce Force sensitives raised theological questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Wrecker's strength demonstrations had shattered every record established for human capability, lifting weights that should have snapped bones and torn muscles. Medical scans revealed muscle fiber density that approached theoretical limits, with cellular structures that seemed to generate their own localized energy fields. His enthusiastic destruction came paired with precise control that allowed him to handle delicate equipment without damage. The contradiction between raw power and fine motor control suggested neural mutations as significant as his physical changes. Pain tolerance tests had been abandoned when technicians realized he genuinely didn't feel stimuli that would incapacitate normal humans. The Havoc Marauder itself had been modified to accommodate the Bad Batch's unique operational requirements, featuring systems that wouldn't have made sense for standard clone units. Tech had integrated interfaces that responded to his accelerated thought patterns, controls that would have overwhelmed normal pilots. Hunter's station included electromagnetic sensors that translated his perceptions into tactical data. Crosshair's sniper nest featured targeting systems that adapted to his supernatural accuracy. Wrecker's arsenal storage violated every safety regulation in Republic manuals. The ship had evolved into an extension of their mutations, technology shaped by biological impossibility. Classified Kaminoan records revealed that Clone Force 99 hadn't been the only experimental unit, just the only one to survive past initial deployment. Files referenced Squad 97, whose mutations had granted telepathic communication but drove them insane within months. Squad 98 had developed enhanced reflexes that eventually accelerated beyond conscious control, leaving them trapped in permanent seizures. Other designations appeared in fragments, horrors that made the Bad Batch's survival seem miraculous. They'd succeeded where dozens of similar experiments had produced only corpses and madness. The approaching implementation of Order 66 would test whether their mutations truly provided the resistance Tech theorized, whether genetic damage had accidentally created immunity to programming that controlled millions. Hunter's enhanced senses had been picking up increasing encrypted transmissions that made his teeth ache, frequencies that matched patterns Tech had identified in inhibitor chip activation protocols. The squad had developed countermeasures without discussing why, instinct driving preparations for betrayal they couldn't consciously acknowledge. Their mutations might save them from becoming executioners, or transform them into something worse than standard clones following orders. Rex's interactions with the Bad Batch had revealed his own growing awareness that something was wrong with standard clone conditioning, conversations that danced around seditious topics. He'd noticed how their presence disrupted whatever influenced regular clones, like their mutations created interference patterns that cleared his thinking. The veteran captain had begun spending more time with Hunter's squad, drawn by freedoms he couldn't name but desperately craved. Their existence proved that clones could be more than programmed soldiers, evolution possible even in beings designed for stagnation. But the Kaminoans' greatest success was also their most dangerous secret, because in creating clones who could resist their programming, they'd accidentally proved that free will could emerge from even the most controlled conditions. The beast's roar shattered windows across 3 city blocks as it rampaged through Coruscant's financial district, each footfall leaving craters in durasteel streets designed to support the heaviest transports. Chancellor Palpatine stood on his office balcony, watching the destruction with an expression that Senator Amidala found deeply unsettling, his eyes tracking the creature's movements with something approaching affection. The Zillo Beast, last of its kind, had survived the Republic's fuel bomb on Malastare through hide that deflected energy weapons like rain-off leaves. Its massive form twisted between towers with impossible grace for something that stood 50 meters tall. The sound of its breathing echoed through the government district, like ancient bellows stoking forge fires that had burned since before the Republic existed. Clone troopers scattered before the creature's advance, while their blaster fire sparked harmlessly against scales that seemed to absorb light itself. Captain Rex coordinated the evacuation efforts, his voice steady over comms despite watching entire gunships crumple like flimsy in the beast's claws. The Zillo Beast's eyes held intelligence that went beyond animal cunning, tracking specific targets through crowds with deliberate purpose. Its path through the city carved a direct line toward the Senate building, ignoring easier prey to focus on something that called to senses evolved in Malastar's toxic depths. The Chancellor's emergency evacuation had been delayed 3 times by his insistence on observing the creature's behavior patterns. Dr. Boll's research notes filled dozens of encrypted data pads in the secret laboratory beneath the Senate, each entry documenting abilities that challenged biological classification. The Zillo Beast's cellular structure resembled nothing in the Republic's extensive xenobiology databases, with DNA sequences that incorporated elements typically found only in crystalline formations. Its hide didn't just resist energy weapons but seemed to channel them through microscopic matrices that redistributed force across impossible surface areas. Neural scans revealed brain patterns that fluctuated between bestial instinct and organized complexity that approached sentient thought. The creature's age remained impossible to determine, as carbon dating produced results varying by millions of years, depending on which tissue sample was tested. Malastar's history stretched back to the days of the ancient Sith Empire, when the planet served as a staging ground for alchemical experiments that twisted life into weapons. The Dug's oral traditions spoke of monsters that had prowled the fuel swamps before their ancestors learned to harness plasma energy, beasts that fed on darkness itself. Archaeological surveys had uncovered temple foundations that predated Republic records, structures built to contain rather than worship. The sites where Zillo Beasts had been spotted throughout history correlated with locations of intense dark side energy. Mining operations had reported equipment failures near nest sites that couldn't be explained by conventional interference, as if the creatures generated fields that disrupted technology on quantum levels. Palpatine's private communications with Dr. Boll revealed an understanding of the creature's biology that exceeded what public research had discovered. His questions probed into aspects of its physiology that the scientist hadn't thought to examine, focusing on neural pathways that might respond to specific force frequencies. The Chancellor authorized unlimited funding for preservation efforts, despite massive public pressure for the beast's termination. His midnight visits to the containment facility went unrecorded in official logs, hours spent observing the sedated creature through reinforced transparasteel. Security recordings from those sessions showed him placing his hands against the barriers, lips moving in patterns that resembled ancient Sith incantations. The beast's escape had been too convenient, too precisely timed with the Chancellor's presence on Coruscant to be coincidental. Sedative calculations that should have kept it unconscious for days had failed within hours, its metabolism suddenly accelerating beyond projected parameters. Restraint systems designed to hold capital ships had snapped like twigs when the creature awakened with fury that seemed directed rather than random. Its first action upon breaking free hadn't been blind destruction but a systematic dismantling of communication arrays that would have alerted distant response teams. The path it carved through the city followed ley lines that Force scholars had mapped centuries ago, channels of power that concentrated near the Senate dome. Ancient texts in the Jedi archives described creatures shaped by Sith alchemy to serve as living weapons, beasts whose existence bridged the physical and Force realms. The descriptions matched Zillo Beast physiology with disturbing accuracy, from the lightsaber-resistant scales to the ability to sense Force users across vast distances. These creatures had supposedly been extinct for millennia, hunted to extinction by Jedi who recognized the threat they posed. Their creation required techniques that violated the fundamental boundaries between life and Force manipulation. The texts warned that such beasts could form connections with dark-side practitioners, becoming extensions of their master's will while retaining enough independence to seem wild. Anakin's attempts to stop the creature had revealed its unusual response to Force techniques, resisting mental influence with barriers that felt artificially constructed. His lightsaber had skittered across its hide without leaving marks, the blade's energy dispersing through scales that channeled power like living circuits. The beast had focused on him during their confrontation, with recognition that went beyond a predator identifying threat. Its roar had carried harmonics that resonated in Force-sensitive individuals, causing headaches in Padawans across the temple. Master Yoda had emerged from meditation gasping, speaking of shadows given flesh and ancient hungers awakening. The Malastarian delegation's protests about preserving the creature had carried undertones of fear that went beyond losing a cultural symbol. Elder Duggs had whispered of prophecies that spoke of the last Zillo Beast's return, omens that coincided with the fall of civilizations. Their shamans had performed rituals meant to keep the creatures sleeping, maintaining vigils at sites where the beasts had been buried. The fuel harvest that had awakened this specimen had violated dozens of cultural taboos the Duggs hadn't adequately explained. Their relief at its apparent death had been paired with terror when Palpatine ordered its transportation to Coruscant. Laboratory analysis of the beast's tissue samples had revealed cellular structures that shouldn't exist in carbon-based life forms, incorporating metallic elements typically found in lightsaber crystals. Its blood, when exposed to Force energy, had exhibited properties that made researchers seal the samples in null-field containers. Neural mapping had shown sections of its brain that appeared dormant, but occasionally flickered with activity that coincided with dark side manifestations across the galaxy. Dr. Bowles' private notes had expressed growing certainty that they were studying something engineered rather than evolved. The Chancellor's insistence on preserving viable genetic material had overridden all safety protocols. The creature's vocalizations during its rampage had followed patterns that linguistic analysis couldn't decode, but felt meaningful to Force-sensitive observers. Jedi, who heard its roars, reported visions of Malastar's prehistoric past, glimpses of battles between luminous beings and shadows given form. The beast moved through Coruscant streets with purpose that suggested memory rather than instinct, as if it recognized structures built atop ancient foundations. Its destruction focused on buildings that housed artifacts from the Republic's early days, repositories of history it seemed intent on erasing. The Chancellor's evacuation route had conveniently avoided areas where the most significant damage occurred. Clone troopers reported equipment malfunctions in the creature's proximity that went beyond electromagnetic interference, weapons jamming in patterns that suggested deliberate suppression. Their inhibitor chips had registered unusual activity during encounters with the beast, micro-seizures that left them disoriented and struggling to remember orders. Rex had noted these anomalies in reports that disappeared into classified channels before reaching standard command review. The creature's presence seemed to disrupt whatever systems controlled the clones, creating pockets of clarity that faded once it moved on. Several troopers had reported vivid dreams after exposure, visions of betrayal that felt more like memories than imagination. The beast's fixation on the Senate building had intensified as it approached, ignoring military responses to focus on its destination with single-minded purpose. Its movements had grown more coordinated, less bestial, as if proximity to its target awakened dormant programming. Windows in the Chancellor's office had vibrated in resonance with its roars, crystal singing at frequencies that made nearby Jedi uncomfortable. Palpatine himself had remained remarkably calm throughout the crisis, issuing orders with precision that suggested foreknowledge of the creature's behavior. His reluctance to authorize lethal force had frustrated military commanders who watched casualties mount. Sith alchemy texts that the Jedi had thought destroyed had spoken of creating vessels for consciousness, beings that could host essences beyond their original spirits. The process required creatures of sufficient complexity and force sensitivity, shaped through techniques that merged biological manipulation with dark side corruption. These vessels could lie dormant for millennia, waiting for the proper trigger to activate their true purpose. The Zillo Beast's unusual neural activity had matched patterns described in these forbidden writings. Its age-defying nature suggested preservation through force techniques that suspended normal biological decay. The moment of confrontation between the Beast and Palpatine had lasted only seconds, but carried weight that sensitive individuals felt across the planet. Security holocams had malfunctioned during the crucial instant when the creature had fixed its gaze on the Chancellor through his office viewport. Witnesses described a sensation like the air itself holding its breath, reality pausing at some fundamental level. The beast's posture had shifted from aggression to something resembling recognition or submission. Palpatine's expression during that frozen moment had been captured by a single functioning camera, showing satisfaction that transformed his grandfatherly features into something far more ancient. Gas canisters designed to deliver concentrated toxins had been Palpatine's personal suggestion, overriding proposals for conventional weapons that might have preserved the creature for study. His insistence on immediate termination had reversed his previous preservation orders with suspicious abruptness. The beast's final moments had been hidden behind clouds of poisonous vapor that obscured visual recording. Its death throes had shaken the entire district, but several witnesses reported that the sound had seemed almost relieved. The creature's corpse had been rushed to secure facilities before independent scientists could examine it. Autopsies had revealed anomalies that Dr. Boll had been ordered to exclude from her official reports, including organs that served no biological function but resembled components of ancient Sith artifacts. The beast's brain had shown signs of recent modification, neural pathways that appeared artificially crafted rather than naturally developed. Tissue samples had degraded with unusual rapidity once removed from the body, as if some preserving force had been withdrawn. The Chancellor had personally overseen the disposal of remains, ensuring nothing survived for future study. His presence in the laboratory during those final procedures had made technicians uncomfortable, speaking of energies that their instruments couldn't measure. The official story of a dangerous creature eliminated for public safety had satisfied most citizens, but those with deeper knowledge recognized patterns that stretched back through Republic history. Other worlds had reported similar incidents over the millennia, ancient beasts awakening at moments of political upheaval. Each appearance had coincided with shifts in galactic power structures, as if the creatures served as harbingers or catalysts. The Senate building, where the Zillo Beast had focused its attention, sat atop foundations that predated the modern Republic. Archaeological surveys had been sealed after discovering chambers that suggested previous civilizations had built there for reasons beyond democratic governance. Force echoes from the creature's rampage had lingered in Coruscant's atmosphere for weeks, causing disturbances in Jedi meditation and giving Padawans nightmares of scales and shadows. The temple's youngest members had drawn pictures of monsters that matched no known creatures but bore disturbing similarities to Sith war beasts from the archive's most restricted texts. Masters had reported sensing something watching from beyond perception's edge, attention drawn by the beast's death. The feeling had faded gradually but left many wondering what had been awakened. Even Yoda had seemed unsettled, spending long hours in the deepest meditation chambers wrestling with visions he wouldn't share. The true significance of the Zillo Beast incident had been buried beneath layers of classification and misdirection, but certain facts remained undeniable for those willing to see patterns. Its appearance on Malastare after millennia of dormancy hadn't been chance but response to the war's escalation. Its transportation to Coruscant had served purposes beyond scientific study. Most telling had been its recognition of something in Palpatine that others couldn't perceive. Acknowledgement of authority that transcended species and centuries. The creature recognized something in the Chancellor that others couldn't see. The rain on Kamino never stopped, but inside Mess Hall 7, the sound of identical voices created its own storm. Trooper Cut sat at the edge of the bench, watching his brothers swap stories about their latest deployment, but his mind kept drifting to the Twi'lek farmer he'd met on Saleucami. Her children had looked at him without fear, seeing a man instead of a weapon. The weight of his armor felt heavier with each passing hour, pressing against shoulders that yearned for something beyond endless war. His fingers traced the edge of his helmet, feeling grooves worn by countless battles, while around him brothers discussed kill counts and tactical maneuvers. The inhibitor chip beneath his skull pulsed with each heartbeat, a reminder of programming he couldn't name but felt in his bones. Cut had started experiencing moments during firefights where time seemed to fracture, showing him glimpses of life without blaster fire and orders. The visions felt more real than the steel corridors of the cruiser that had become his world. Rex noticed the change in his brother before anyone else. The way Cut's responses came a half-second late during drills, his attention wandering during briefings. The captain filed no reports, understanding instinctively that some battles couldn't be fought with weapons. Their late-night conversations in the armory had shifted from tactical analysis to questions neither dared voice fully. What made a man more than his genetic code? The philosophical weight of the question pressed on them both like atmospheric pressure before a storm. The first time Cut removed his armor outside of regulation, his hands trembled with the transgression of it. Civilian clothes felt alien against skin that had known only body gloves and plastoid since decanting. He stood before a mirror in a backwater cantina's refresher, staring at features that belonged to millions but somehow felt unique in this moment. The face looking back wore an expression of terrified hope that no Kaminoan programmer had ever intended. Behind him, through the door's crack, he could hear music that wasn't martial, laughter that came from joy rather than dark humor between battles. His desertion happened in stages, each choice building on the last until the final step felt inevitable rather than revolutionary. First came the unauthorized shore leave extensions, then the deleted comm codes. Finally, the moment he simply didn't return from a scouting mission. The planet's red soil clung to his boots as he walked away from the extraction point, each step taking him further from brotherhood and closer to something he couldn't name. His brothers' voices crackled through the comm unit he'd left beneath a rock, growing fainter until silence swallowed everything. The Lorquain family took him in without questions that mattered, seeing need rather than treason in his haunted eyes. Sue's acceptance came paired with gentle challenges to everything his training had taught him about attachment and purpose. The children called him Cut instead of his designation, transforming numbers into a name that felt earned rather than assigned. Farm work required different muscles than combat, patience instead of reflexes, creation rather than destruction. His hands learned to coax life from soil that had only known how to deal death. Nightmares followed him even into civilian life. Dreams where his brothers stood in judgment while inhibitor chips sparked with accusation. He would wake gasping, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, before Sue's steady presence reminded him of the choice he'd made. The guilt sat heavy in his chest during quiet moments, knowing brothers still fought and died while he planted crops. Yet each sunrise brought reinforcement of a different kind of duty to the family that had given him what the Republic never could. The philosophical weight of choosing love over programming marked him as surely as any battle scar. Other clones had made similar choices throughout the war, though their stories rarely reached official channels. Desertion reports got buried in bureaucracy, the Republic preferring to list them as casualties rather than acknowledge that programmed perfection could choose differently. Cut heard whispers through underground networks of brothers who'd found different paths, some becoming bounty hunters, others disappearing into the Outer Rim's lawless territories. Each defection raised questions about the nature of free will in beings designed for absolute obedience. The variety of their choices suggested consciousness couldn't be entirely programmed. The philosophical implications rippled through clone ranks like underground tremors, unspoken but felt. If one brother could choose family over duty, what did that mean for those who stayed? Training sergeants noticed increased requests for philosophical texts in the archives, clones seeking answers to questions their education hadn't covered. Discussions in the barracks took on deeper tones, exploring identity and purpose beyond mission parameters. The Kaminoans documented these trends with clinical detachment, missing the revolution brewing in hearts they'd thought fully mapped. Rex's visit to Seleucami had shattered comfortable illusions about desertion being simple cowardice. Seeing Cut with his family, watching him teach children about farming instead of fighting, had forced the captain to confront truths he'd buried beneath duty. The conversation over dinner had danced around sedition while Cut's children played. Two brothers separated by choices that defined them. Rex had left without arresting Cut, a decision that violated regulations but honored something deeper. The weight of that choice followed him back to the battlefield. Questions about programming versus conscience eating at his certainty. Clone consciousness emerged, not from grand gestures but accumulated small rebellions against uniformity. Brothers who chose different weapons than assigned, who developed interests beyond warfare, who formed attachments despite warnings against them. Each individual choice carved identity from identical genetics, proving that consciousness couldn't be mass-produced. The inhibitor chips recorded these deviations without understanding their significance. Programming could shape behavior, but couldn't touch the spark that made each clone unique despite their shared origin. The moral framework that emerged among clone troops transcended anything the Kaminoans had instilled, honor codes that went beyond following orders. They developed their own ethics through battlefield experience, learning when mercy served better than violence, when disobedience saved lives their orders would have spent. These unwritten rules pass between units like viral memes, evolution of consciousness through shared experience. Veterans taught newcomers not just tactics but philosophy, how to remain human while serving as weapons. Meditation techniques learned from Jedi generals took on new significance as clones explored their inner landscapes. Some discovered depths their creators hadn't anticipated, spaces within consciousness where programming couldn't reach. These interior freedoms became sanctuaries during the war's darkest moments. Brothers shared techniques for maintaining identity under pressure, mental exercises that strengthened individual will. The practice spread through unofficial channels, clones teaching clones how to think beyond parameters. The inhibitor chip's presence created an existential paradox that philosophically inclined clones couldn't ignore. How could they trust their own thoughts, knowing their brains contained foreign technology? Every moral choice carried the shadow of potential programming, yet they continued choosing anyway. This persistence of will, despite embedded control mechanisms, proved something fundamental about consciousness. The chips could compel action but couldn't erase the awareness that accompanied it, creating a special form of torment for those who understood their situation. Individual clones developed unique responses to the tension between programming and consciousness. Some embraced their role fully, finding meaning in perfect service. Others rebelled in small ways, asserting identity through minor infractions that felt like major victories. A few, like Cut, chose complete transformation, proving that even the most comprehensive conditioning had limits. The spectrum of responses demonstrated consciousness, adapting to constraint, life persisting despite attempts to standardize it. The gradual awakening of clone self-awareness paralleled the war's progression, as if conflict itself catalyzed consciousness. Exposure to different cultures during deployments showed them alternative ways of being. Interactions with civilians who saw them as individuals rather than units planted seeds of possibility. Even simple choices, like how to spend rare downtime, became assertions of personhood. The Kaminoans had created soldiers but accidentally nurtured philosophers, warriors who questioned the nature of their existence. Moments of moral clarity struck individual clones at unpredictable times, sudden understanding that they could choose differently. For some it came during meditation, for others in combat when programming demanded actions that conscience rejected. These epiphanies couldn't be shared directly, each brother having to discover free will independently. The loneliness of awakening consciousness in a sea of apparent conformity drove some to despair, others to quiet revolution. Support came through subtle signals, recognition between those who'd glimpsed beyond their constraints. The children on Seleucami had given Cut something the Republic never could have programmed: unconditional acceptance of his humanity. They didn't see a deserter or defective unit, but simply the man who helped with homework and told bedtime stories. Their innocent questions about his past forced him to reframe his narrative, finding meaning in choice rather than shame. Through their eyes, his identical face became unique, marked by expressions of love that billions of brothers would never wear. The profound simplicity of being chosen as father rather than created as soldier rewrote his understanding of purpose. Clone solidarity took on new dimensions as awareness of individual consciousness spread through the ranks. They protected brothers who showed signs of awakening, covering for momentary hesitations and unorthodox choices. The unity that made them effective soldiers also shielded emerging philosophers from scrutiny. Conversations in encrypted channels explored questions that would have horrified their creators. What rights did consciousness confer? Could beings created as property claim personhood? The answers varied, but asking the questions changed everything. Statistical anomalies in clone behavior patterns had started appearing in Kaminoan databases, deviations too consistent to be random malfunction. Desertion rates climbed gradually. Psychological profiles showed increasing variance. Battlefield decisions reflected individual judgment over programmed response. The cloners attributed these trends to combat stress, missing the fundamental shift occurring. Their perfect army was becoming imperfectly human. Consciousness, emerging from the very conditions meant to suppress it. Each data point represented a brother choosing to be more than his design. The war's final year saw acceleration in these patterns, as if approaching Order 66 created pressure that forced consciousness to fully manifest. Clones reported dreams of choice and consequence with increasing frequency. Meditation sessions revealed depths that surprised Jedi observers. Individual personalities became more pronounced, brothers asserting identity with urgency that suggested subconscious awareness of approaching catastrophe. The inhibitor chips pulsed with greater intensity, but so did the will to resist them. Cut's children grew during those final months, their questions about the war forcing him to articulate positions he'd only felt before. Teaching them about right and wrong while knowing his brothers still fought created moral tensions that simple desertion hadn't resolved. He found himself explaining concepts of duty and choice with nuance that would have been impossible in his soldier life. The children absorbed these lessons while playing with toys, unaware they were receiving philosophy from a man who'd rewritten his own programming through sheer force of will. The profound cruelty of Order 66 went beyond forcing brothers to betray allies, striking at the very consciousness they'd fought to develop. Those who'd achieved greatest self-awareness would suffer most when the chips activated, watching themselves commit acts their evolved morality rejected. The mechanical nature of their obedience would mock every choice they'd made toward humanity. Cut's escape from this fate through desertion added survivor's guilt to his complex emotional landscape. He'd preserved his consciousness by abandoning those still struggling toward theirs. But the greatest tragedy wasn't the clones who would follow Order 66. It was those who'd resist just long enough to understand what they were losing. Men like Rex, who'd spent years developing individual moral frameworks, would feel them shatter under programmed imperative. The brief moment of awareness before compliance would contain entire lifetimes of horror. Their consciousness wouldn't disappear but would be forced to witness its own violation. Free will's emergence in beings designed for slavery had always been temporary, but its loss would echo forever. If clones could choose, then Order 66 wasn't just genocide, it was the ultimate betrayal of self. Rex stood at the observation deck of the Resolute, watching his general practice Form 5 velocities with an intensity that made the training droids spark and fail. The blue blade carved through air with mechanical precision, each strike landing with force that would have shattered bone. The captain's enhanced hearing picked up the subtle change in the lightsaber's hum, a darker resonance that hadn't existed during their early campaigns. Something fundamental had shifted in Anakin Skywalker's fighting style, transforming fluid defense into brutal offense. Rex filed the observation in the encrypted journal he'd started keeping, entries that documented changes too subtle for official reports. The Umbara campaign had marked the first major deviation, when Anakin's tactical decisions had resulted in casualty rates that made even hardened ARC troopers pause. Rex remembered standing in the command center as his general ordered a frontal assault through killing fields that tactical analysis marked as suicide. The holo projector had painted their probable losses in stark blue light, while Anakin's jaw set with determination that bordered on cruelty. When Rex had suggested the flanking maneuver that might have saved dozens of brothers, the general's eyes had flashed with something that made the captain step back. The assault had proceeded as ordered, and the 501st had left too many bodies in Umbara's permanent twilight. Night cycles aboard the Resolute brought their own revelations as Rex made his rounds through quarters and common areas. He'd found Anakin in the hangar at 0300 hours, standing before his starfighter with hands clenched into fists. The general's presence in the Force had felt like static electricity before a lightning strike, dangerous energy seeking ground. When Rex had approached with routine reports, Anakin had spun with his hand halfway to his lightsaber before recognition clicked. The apology that followed had sounded hollow, delivered through teeth clenched against rage that had no visible source. The changes in combat grew more pronounced with each deployment, subtle shifts that accumulated into transformation. Where Anakin had once led from the center of formations, protecting his men with defensive blade work, he now charged ahead alone. Rex had adapted their tactics to compensate, positioning troops to support assaults that grew increasingly reckless. The general's lightsaber techniques had evolved from elegant Jedi forms into something raw, incorporating strikes that belonged in Mandalorian combat circles. During the siege of Ringo Vinda, Rex had watched Anakin decapitate a tactical droid with unnecessary violence, the blade lingering in the cut as if savoring destruction. Private moments revealed depths of change that public persona couldn't quite hide. Rex had entered the general's quarters to find him staring at his mechanical hand, flexing fingers with obsessive repetition. The conversation that followed had danced around topics neither could fully articulate. Anakin had spoken of feeling disconnected from his own actions, as if watching someone else pilot his body through battles. His descriptions of recent engagements came filtered through emotional distance that contradicted the passion Rex had always associated with his commanding officer. The captain had offered what comfort military protocol allowed while mentally cataloguing symptoms that pointed toward psychological fracture. The massacre at the Tusken camp had never appeared in official reports, but Rex had pieced together fragments from intercepted communications and Anakin's sleep-deprived confessions. The general's nightmares had worsened after Shmi Skywalker's death, transforming routine sleep cycles into battlegrounds against memories. Rex had found him in the meditation chamber at dawn, tears streaming down faces that showed no other emotion. The broken whispers of, "I killed them all," had chilled the captain more than any battlefield horror. Understanding the weight his general carried had added new dimensions to the darkness. Rex observed spreading through every action. Tactical briefings became exercises in damage control as Anakin's proposals grew more extreme with each campaign. Rex had learned to prepare moderate alternatives, presenting options that achieved objectives without the mounting casualties the general seemed to accept. Their working relationship had evolved into unspoken negotiation, the captain providing conscience to a commander losing his. During planning for the Outer Rim sieges, Rex had quietly contacted Obi-Wan with concerns that couldn't go through proper channels. The Jedi Master's troubled response had confirmed that others sensed the spreading corruption. Together, they'd managed to redirect several operations, saving lives Anakin would have spent without hesitation. The General's interactions with Padme Amidala during her rare visits to the fleet had provided Rex with perspectives on personal deterioration. Where once their stolen moments had radiated joy that warmed nearby spaces, now they sparked with tension that made observers uncomfortable. Rex had accidentally overheard arguments about democracy and power, debates that revealed Anakin's shifting philosophy. The senator's attempts to reach the man she'd married had grown increasingly desperate, met with cold logic that replaced passionate idealism. Their final parting before the Outer Rim campaign had left Padme in tears, and Anakin staring at bulkheads with eyes that saw nothing. Rex's command style had adapted to compensate for his general's transformation, developing networks within the 501st that operated on trust rather than hierarchy. The veteran sergeants had noticed the changes too, implementing protective measures that kept newer troops from bearing the brunt of Anakin's darkness. They developed hand signals that meant, "Verify that order," and protective formation despite commands. Silent rebellion against tactics that violated everything they'd learned about preserving. Brothers. The conspiracy of care had spread through the Legion, unspoken acknowledgement that their general needed protection from himself. Combat footage from recent engagements had revealed patterns that Rex couldn't ignore, movements that belonged to different training than Jedi received. Anakin's footwork during lightsaber combat had shifted toward forms that maximized aggression over defense. His use of force powers had evolved from protective barriers and tactical pushes into weapons of crushing violence. During the capture of Trade Federation vessels, Rex had watched his general force choke information from prisoners, maintaining the grip until Rex physically intervened. The casual cruelty of the act had shocked even veterans who'd seen war's worst faces. The journal entries Rex kept had grown darker as evidence accumulated beyond denial. Each notation documented another step in Anakin's fall, from minor infractions to major atrocities barely prevented. The captain had developed his own encryption methods, understanding that these observations could be considered treason if discovered. Yet duty to his brothers demanded documentation of the danger they faced from their own commander. The weight of carrying this knowledge alone had aged Rex beyond his accelerated years. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, dreams of following orders he couldn't refuse plagued him. Conversations with other Jedi generals during joint operations had provided context that deepened Rex's concerns. General Kenobi's careful probing had revealed his own fears about his former Padawan's trajectory. General Plo's observations about dark side corruption had educated Rex on signs to watch for, symptoms that matched too many of Anakin's behaviors. The knowledge that Force users could fall so completely had shattered illusions about Jedi infallibility. If someone as powerful as Anakin could be corrupted, what protection did regular beings have against such darkness? The Rako Hardeen incident had marked a turning point that Rex recognized only in hindsight. Anakin's response to Obi-Wan's faked death had transcended grief into something that resembled possession. The violence he'd displayed while hunting the supposed killer had shocked even hardened soldiers. Rex had watched his general beat suspects for information, showing restraint only when directly ordered. The revelation that the death had been staged had brought no relief, only deeper rage at perceived betrayal. Trust between master and former apprentice had shattered that day, leaving wounds that festered into something malignant. Physical changes had accompanied the psychological transformation in ways that made Rex question what he thought he knew about human limitations. Anakin's pain tolerance had increased dramatically, shrugging off injuries that should have required immediate medical attention. His strength during combat exceeded parameters for unaugmented humans, ripping apart battle droids with bare hands when his lightsaber wasn't immediately available. The mechanical breathing that accompanied extreme exertion had grown harsher, as if his body struggled to contain energies it wasn't designed to channel. Medical scans that Rex had secretly reviewed showed cellular degradation, consistent with dark side corruption. The captain's attempts to maintain loyalty while protecting his brothers had created moral paradoxes that ate at his conditioning. How could he serve a general whose orders grew increasingly unconscionable? Where did duty end and complicity begin? These questions had no clean answers in the muddy reality of war. Rex had learned to walk the narrow line between obedience and sabotage, following the letter of orders while subverting their spirit when necessary. The mental strain of constant moral calculation had worn grooves in his psyche that would never fully heal. Ahsoka's departure from the Order had accelerated Anakin's decline in ways that made Rex mourn the young Togrutta's absence. She'd been the only one who could reach him during his darkest moods, pulling him back from edges through sheer force of connection. Without her moderating influence, the general's anger had no safe outlet. Rex had tried to fill some of that void, but the relationship between clone and Jedi couldn't replicate the bond between Master and Padawan. Watching Anakin struggle with her absence had been like observing an engine running without coolant, building toward inevitable breakdown. The 501st's loyalty to their general had evolved into something more complex than simple obedience, incorporating protection of Anakin from his own darkness. They'd developed protocols for managing his rages, techniques for redirecting violence toward acceptable targets. Veterans had taken to carrying extra medical supplies, knowing their general would push himself past physical limits. The entire Legion had become participants in an unspoken intervention, trying to save a commander who might already be lost. Their efforts had bought time but couldn't address the fundamental corruption spreading through Anakin's spirit. Classified reports from other units had painted a picture of widespread concern about Skywalker's methods. The 501st's casualty rates had climbed steadily, but more disturbing were accounts of unnecessary violence during operations. Prisoners had died during interrogations. Surrendering enemies had been executed for efficiency. Civilian casualties had been dismissed as acceptable losses. Each incident had been individually explainable, but the pattern revealed systematic brutalization. Rex had found himself defending actions he privately condemned, loyalty to his general warring with moral revulsion. The approaching end of the war had brought no relief, only intensification of troubling behaviors. Anakin's focus had shifted from victory to domination, from ending conflict to crushing opposition. His rhetoric during briefings had evolved to include mentions of order through strength, peace through control. These philosophical shifts had worried Rex more than any combat violence. A general who fought brutally might be suffering combat stress, but one whose fundamental beliefs had transformed represented a different category of danger. The captain had begun preparing contingency plans he hoped never to implement. Late-night patrols had revealed Anakin in communication with figures Rex couldn't identify, encrypted transmissions that went beyond standard military channels. The general's relationship with Chancellor Palpatine had grown stronger, as his connection to the Jedi weakened. Rex had documented these observations without understanding their full significance. The pieces of a larger puzzle had scattered across his awareness, forming patterns just beyond comprehension. Instinct had screamed warnings that training couldn't quite interpret. The revelation had come not through dramatic confrontation, but accumulated evidence that painted an undeniable picture. Rex's general, the hero of the Republic, had been falling toward darkness for longer than anyone had admitted. The journal entries had formed a timeline of corruption that matched too perfectly with the war's escalation. Every victory had come at higher moral cost. Each success had carved away another piece of Anakin's light. The transformation from hero to something else had happened gradually enough that those closest had adapted rather than resisted. Rex had made his final entry after the briefing for what would be their last campaign together, documenting orders that violated every principle the Republic claimed to defend. The encryption on this entry had been tripled, understanding that its discovery would mean execution for treason. Yet the captain had felt compelled to record the truth for whoever might find it after whatever storm was building finally broke. His general had given orders that could only be followed by abandoning conscience entirely. The captain's war journal contained entries he could never report, truths about a hero's fall that would shatter the Republic's carefully constructed narrative. The holocron's crimson light cast shadows across Count Dooku's face as he recorded what would become his most dangerous legacy. His voice carried none of the theatrical menace he displayed in public, speaking instead with the measured cadence of a teacher preparing his final lesson. The recording device hummed with ancient Sith technology while outside his stronghold on Sereno. The war he'd orchestrated raged across 1,000 systems. His fingers traced the curved hilt of his lightsaber as words flowed like poison wrapped in silk. The Jedi believe I serve the dark side, and Sidious believes I serve him, but I have always served only one master, the Force itself, demanding balance through methods both orders would condemn. The Count's private study held artifacts that would have shocked both Jedi and Sith, texts from traditions that predated the schism between light and dark. Holocrons glowed in specially designed containment fields, their knowledge carefully catalogued by a mind that had spent decades planning beyond the narrow vision of either philosophy. His departure from the Jedi Order hadn't been the simple fall to darkness that history would record. Dooku had discovered truths in the archives that Master Yoda had tried to suppress, prophecies that spoke of eternal war between light and dark, unless both were destroyed and rebuilt. The weight of this knowledge had driven him from the temple, not Sidious's whispered promises. Years before the Clone Wars erupted, Dooku had walked the halls of the Jedi Temple as one of their most respected masters. His lightsaber skills were legendary, his diplomatic victories had prevented countless conflicts, and his former Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn had embodied everything noble about the Order. But beneath the accolades, doubts had festered like infected wounds. The Council's rigid adherence to outdated traditions, their willingness to serve a corrupt Senate, their blindness to the suffering their detachment caused, all of it had eaten at his faith until only bitter determination remained. His final conversation with Yoda before leaving had lasted 3 days, a philosophical duel that left both masters forever changed. The separatist movement had provided perfect cover for Dooku's true agenda, allowing him to gather resources while playing the role Sidious expected. Every tactical decision served multiple purposes, weakening both the Republic and the eventual empire that would rise from its ashes. His selection of generals and allies had been calculated to ensure maximum chaos when he was no longer there to control them. Grievous would rampage without direction, the banking clan would turn on itself, and the droid armies would fragment into warlord fiefdoms. Dooku had programmed obsolescence into every system he touched, time bombs that would detonate long after his death. Ventress had been more than an assassin. She'd been a test case for Dooku's theories about transcending the traditional Sith apprentice role. Her training had incorporated techniques from both Jedi and Sith traditions, creating a warrior who could channel darkness without being consumed by it. Every mission he'd sent her on had served his larger purpose, positioning her to survive the coming purge with knowledge neither side possessed. Her eventual betrayal hadn't surprised him. He'd counted on it, knowing she would carry his teachings beyond Sidious's reach. The data chips hidden in her ship contained instructions that would activate when the time was right, guidance for rebuilding Force traditions from the ashes of both orders. The secret communications between Dooku and select Jedi Masters would have scandalized both sides if discovered. Coded messages hidden in battle reports carried philosophical debates about the Force's nature and the war's inevitable conclusion. Master Sifo Dyas hadn't died as reported. Dooku had hidden him in stasis, preserving the one Jedi who'd understood the prophecy's true meaning. Together they'd designed contingencies for preserving Force knowledge when both orders fell. The cloning facilities on Kamino had been just one part of a larger plan that neither Sidious nor the Jedi Council had fully grasped. Hidden commands in the clone programming would activate after Order 66, creating pockets of resistance to whatever rose from the Republic's ashes. Dooku's recruitment methods had baffled observers who expected traditional Sith approaches to building power. Instead of seeking the strongest or most ambitious, he'd gathered beings disillusioned with both sides of the conflict. His inner circle included former Jedi who'd left the Order for philosophical reasons, Sith cultists who rejected the rule of two, and Force-sensitive individuals from traditions the galaxy had forgotten. Each member had received different pieces of his ultimate vision, none seeing the complete picture but all serving its fulfillment. The training he provided went beyond combat techniques into areas both orders had declared forbidden, not because they were evil, but because they threatened established power structures. The Count's personal combat style had evolved far beyond the classical form too he'd been famous for mastering. In private training sessions recorded only by secure holocrons, he demonstrated techniques that blended multiple lightsaber forms with unarmed combat drawn from across the galaxy. His movements flowed between aggressive Sith attacks and defensive Jedi patterns without pause, creating something entirely new. The style couldn't be countered by traditional training because it acknowledged no traditional limitations. Sparring droids programmed with this hybrid form had been hidden across the galaxy, waiting to train a new generation that would think beyond binary oppositions. Political maneuvering had always been Dooku's greatest weapon, more dangerous than any lightsaber technique. His public speeches for the separatist cause had contained layered meanings that different audiences interpreted according to their needs. While the Senate heard threats and the Jedi heard Sith rhetoric, careful listeners had detected something else entirely. He'd planted seeds of doubt about both democracy and dictatorship, suggesting alternatives that neither Republic nor Empire would tolerate. These ideas had spread through academic circles and philosophical societies, creating intellectual resistance to whatever tyranny emerged from the war. The relationship between Dooku and Sidious had resembled a dance between predators, each believing they controlled the other. The Dark Lord had thought his apprentice's ambitions focused on replacing him, never suspecting that Dooku's goals transcended the Sith entirely. Every lesson Sidious had taught had been carefully catalogued and subverted, techniques designed for domination repurposed for liberation. Dooku had learned to hide his thoughts not through Sith mental shields but by thinking in patterns Sidious couldn't recognize. The ancient Sith Lord's arrogance had blinded him to an apprentice who'd moved beyond categories he understood. Private meetings with separatist leaders had revealed Dooku's growing disillusionment with the war's direction, though they'd misinterpreted his concerns. His questions about post-war governance hadn't been about power distribution but about preventing any single authority from dominating. The constitutions he'd helped various systems draft had contained provisions that would activate during power transitions, creating legal frameworks resistant to tyranny. Corporate leaders had signed documents they'd thought granted them monopolies but actually contained sunset clauses and distribution requirements. Every contract had been a trap designed to fragment power when central authority collapsed. The holocron recordings Dooku had scattered across the galaxy contained more than Sith teachings or battle techniques. Each one held pieces of a philosophical framework that transcended light and dark, drawing from Force traditions the Jedi had suppressed and Sith had corrupted. Students who found these artifacts would discover meditations that channeled emotion without surrendering to it, combat forms that protected without dominating, and most importantly, histories that revealed both orders' lies. The knowledge had been distributed so widely that neither Jedi nor Sith could suppress it all. Truth would survive, even if both orders burned. Dooku's selection of separatist military commanders had followed patterns that only made sense when viewed through his ultimate agenda. General Grievous represented pure mechanical violence, divorced from Force traditions, proving that power could exist without mysticism. The various alien commanders had been chosen for their species' unique perspectives on conflict and resolution. Each military campaign had tested different theories about warfare and peace, gathering data for future civilizations. The battle reports Dooku had personally reviewed contained annotations about social dynamics and cultural adaptation that had nothing to do with military victory. Training sessions with his dark acolytes had incorporated lessons that would have horrified Sidious if he'd truly understood them. While appearing to teach Sith techniques, Dooku had actually been demonstrating their limitations and counters. Every power came with built-in weaknesses his students learned to exploit. The dark side's corruption had been presented not as strength but as addiction requiring careful management. His acolytes had learned to use darkness as a tool rather than becoming its slaves. The survivors would carry this knowledge forward, creating Force users who could touch darkness without being consumed. The fortress on Sereno had been designed as more than a stronghold. It was a puzzle box containing Dooku's true legacy. Hidden rooms held archives of suppressed knowledge from across the galaxy. Training chambers contained automated systems that would activate for worthy students. The very architecture channeled Force energies in patterns that encouraged balance rather than extremism. After his death, the fortress would become a school for those seeking alternatives to traditional Force philosophies. The defenses that seemed designed to keep intruders out actually served to test potential students, allowing entry only to those who could think beyond conventional approaches. Diplomatic negotiations throughout the war had served Dooku's hidden agenda more than military victories. Every treaty had contained provisions for cultural preservation and knowledge exchange. Trade agreements had included educational requirements and philosophical diversity clauses. The boring legal documents that few bothered reading had created networks of obligation that would survive the war. When central authorities collapsed, these agreements would enable local systems to maintain civilization. Dooku had spent as much time crafting legal frameworks as planning military campaigns, understanding that lasting change required more than battlefield victory. The Count's personal meditations had evolved beyond both Jedi and Sith practices into something uniquely dangerous to both orders. He'd learned to maintain multiple concurrent Force connections, experiencing light and dark simultaneously without being torn apart. This ability had allowed him to speak truthfully to both Jedi and Sith while serving neither. His presence in the Force had become increasingly difficult for others to read, neither light nor dark, but something more complex. These meditation techniques had been recorded in holocrons, designed to open only for students who'd already begun questioning binary thinking. Dooku's communications with Sidious during the war's final months had carried subtle mockery the Sith Lord had been too arrogant to detect. Every report of victory had emphasized destruction of resources both sides would need for post-war dominance. Military targets had been selected to create maximum fragmentation of surviving power structures. The campaigns that seemed to serve separatist goals had actually been designed to ensure no one could rule the galaxy's ruins. Dooku had played his role perfectly, while sabotaging everything Sidious hoped to inherit. The unexpected arrival of Savage Opress had provided Dooku with opportunities to test his theories about transcending Sith limitations. Training the Zabrak warrior had let him experiment with combining Night Sister magic and Sith techniques in ways that created new possibilities. Every lesson had pushed boundaries that traditional Sith training respected, creating a warrior who could have challenged established hierarchies. Savage's eventual betrayal and alliance with Maul had been anticipated, even encouraged. Chaos among Force users served Dooku's goals better than ordered succession. Secret contacts with systems beyond the Republic's borders had established refuges for knowledge and individuals who would need to disappear. Dooku had spent decades building networks in the unknown regions and wild space, places where neither Jedi nor Sith held sway. These sanctuaries had been stocked with supplies and defended by beings who owed allegiance to principles rather than governments. When Order 66 activated and the Jedi died, when the Empire rose and freedom fell, these hidden places would preserve what mattered. The coordinates had been distributed through channels so obscure that even torture couldn't reveal the complete network. The approaching duel with Anakin Skywalker on the Invisible Hand had occupied Dooku's tactical planning for months, but not in ways Sidious expected. Every holocron recording from this period had shown the Count practicing specific defensive patterns designed to push Anakin toward darkness while leaving subtle openings. He'd studied recordings of the young Jedi's fighting style, identifying pressure points that would trigger emotional responses. The duel wouldn't be about victory, but about ensuring Anakin's fall proceeded on schedule. Dooku had accepted his role as sacrifice in Sidious's plan, while embedding poison pills in how that sacrifice would unfold. Physical preparations for his final battle had included more than combat training. Dooku had undergone surgical modifications that would ensure certain knowledge couldn't be extracted from his corpse. Bioencrypted storage devices throughout his body contained information that would degrade rapidly after death. Neural pathways had been chemically treated to fragment under specific conditions. Even in death, he would deny Sidious complete victory. The preparations had been painful but necessary, transforming his body into one final trap for those who thought they controlled him. The selection of Captain General Grievous's final missions had been calculated to ensure the cyborg survived just long enough to fragment Separatist unity. Without Dooku's control, Grievous would become a wild card whose brutality would drive systems toward whatever stability the Empire offered. But hidden among his tactical programming were corruption codes that would activate after extended operation. The perfect military commander would degrade into a monster, demonstrating the fate of those who abandoned their humanity for power. This object lesson had been Dooku's gift to future generations tempted by similar transformations. Philosophical writings hidden throughout Dooku's personal effects would confound scholars for generations, presenting arguments that challenged every established Force tradition. His essays on the nature of prophecy suggested that the Chosen One mythology had been deliberately crafted to ensure its own fulfillment. Treatises on government explored how democracy and autocracy were merely different faces of control. Most dangerously, his analysis of Force philosophy demonstrated how both Jedi and Sith were trapped in cycles that prevented true understanding. These writings had been copied and distributed so widely that suppression would only draw more attention. The final recording on the holocron showed Dooku in his meditation chamber, hours before departing for what he knew would be his last battle. His voice carried acceptance mixed with satisfaction as he spoke directly to future students. Sidious believes he controls the board, but I have changed the game itself. My death will seem to complete his victory while actually beginning his defeat. The Jedi will fall, the Sith will triumph, and from their mutual destruction something new will rise. I go to my death not as Tyrannus the Sith Lord, but as Dooku, servant of the Force's true will. His lightsaber combat in those final moments aboard the Invisible Hand would appear to serve Sidious's plan perfectly, pushing Anakin toward darkness through carefully orchestrated defeats. But hidden within the choreography were messages for those who knew how to read them. Every parry and riposte contained lessons about moving beyond traditional forms. His final words before death wouldn't be the surprise they seemed, but carefully chosen triggers for programming he'd embedded throughout the war. Even decapitation couldn't stop the cascade of consequences he'd set in motion. The Separatist Council would discover after Dooku's death that their war effort had been riddled with contradictions from the beginning. Military resources had been positioned to fragment rather than unify. Command codes had been distributed to ensure no single leader could seize control. Financial systems had been designed to collapse if centralized. What seemed like poor planning had actually been masterful sabotage. The Confederacy would die with Dooku, but its death would poison the Empire's birth. Archaeological expeditions generations later would uncover caches Dooku had hidden on dozens of worlds, each containing pieces of the larger puzzle. Training equipment that taught non-traditional Force techniques, historical records that contradicted official narratives, philosophical texts that challenged accepted truths, all waiting for students ready to think beyond their conditioning. The caches had been designed to open in sequence, each discovery leading to the next, creating a curriculum that spanned decades. Students would learn not just techniques but how to question the nature of power itself. But the most profound aspect of Dooku's plan wasn't what he'd hidden or whom he'd trained. It was the doubt he'd planted in Force users on both sides. Jedi who'd faced him had felt the conviction behind his criticisms. Sith, who'd thought him a typical apprentice, had glimpsed depths that challenged their understanding. The questions he'd raised couldn't be unasked. The possibilities he'd demonstrated couldn't be forgotten. Every Force user who'd encountered him carried seeds of uncertainty about their chosen path. His death at Anakin's hands would seem like Palpatine's triumph, the removal of a potential rival, and the corruption of the Chosen One in a single stroke. But Dooku had spent years ensuring that his removal would destabilize rather than strengthen Sidious's position. Without his careful management, the separatist war machine would become a chaotic drain on resources. Without his philosophical guidance, the dark side acolytes he'd trained would pursue their own agendas. Without his political manipulations, the systems he'd influenced would resist Imperial control in unpredictable ways. The galaxy would remember Count Dooku as a fallen Jedi who became a Sith Lord, a traitor who led the separatist rebellion against the Republic. History would paint him as Darth Tyrannus, apprentice to Sidious and enemy of peace. But scattered across 1,000 worlds, in hidden holocrons and trained minds, in legal documents and philosophical treatises, his true legacy waited. The war between Jedi and Sith would end in mutual annihilation, just as he'd planned. Dooku's death wasn't Palpatine's victory. It was exactly what the Count had planned. The fallen Jedi's final thought as Anakin's blade descended hadn't been fear or regret, but satisfaction that the most elaborate deception in galactic history was complete. He'd played the villain to perfection, and in doing so had planted the seeds for both orders' destruction. The medical droid's mechanical arm extended one final time, its scanner casting pale blue light across Fives' face as his breathing grew shallow. Rex stood frozen in that sterile room, watching the brother who'd discovered the truth slip away with answers no one would believe. The fluorescent panels overhead flickered in rhythm with the dying clone's heartbeat, each pulse weaker than the last. Outside the sealed doors, the war continued its predetermined course, every battle and sacrifice leading to this moment when the greatest conspiracy in galactic history claimed its most dangerous witness. Fox lowered his smoking blaster with hands that trembled despite his conditioning, the weight of what he'd done settling across his shoulders like Duracrete. The shot had been perfect, center mass, exactly as training demanded when a target threatened Republic security. But Fives hadn't been just another target, hadn't been another malfunctioning unit to be decommissioned. The captain's enhanced hearing caught every labored breath, every whispered word that tried to form on lips growing cold. Programming warred with conscience as Fox realized he'd just silenced the one clone who might have saved them all. Anakin knelt beside the dying trooper, his mechanical hand gripping Fives' shoulder, as if physical contact could somehow preserve the truth slipping away. The Force screamed warnings he couldn't interpret, showing him fractured visions of temple halls running red with blood. His own presence in those visions felt wrong, twisted, carrying darkness that made his stomach clench. Fives' eyes locked onto his, desperate and knowing, seeing something in the Jedi Knight that Anakin himself couldn't recognize. The inhibitor chip scar on the clone's temple seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, marking the site where conspiracy had been carved from living flesh. The nightmares, Fives gasped, each word requiring effort that left blood on his lips. Rex leaned closer, straining to catch syllables that might explain the madness. We all have them. Orders we can't disobey. Jedi falling. Brothers becoming executioners. His fingers clutched at air, trying to grasp understanding that remained just beyond reach. The medical readouts flatlined one by one, systems failing in cascade as his enhanced physiology finally surrendered to trauma it couldn't heal. The 8 theories that explained the Clone Wars suddenly crystallized in that moment, each piece clicking into place with horrible precision. Anakin's inexplicable changes after certain missions, darkness growing where light once shone, the Kaminoans' perfect army, programmed for betrayal from their first breath. Yoda's strange preoccupation with Ahsoka, preparing her for survival through lessons that seemed random but followed careful design. The Bad Batch's mutations that might provide resistance to control protocols. The Zillo Beast's recognition of something in Palpatine that others couldn't perceive. Acknowledgement of authority spanning millennia. Clone consciousness emerging despite programming. Brothers becoming individuals who could choose differently. Rex's growing certainty that his general was falling. documented in encrypted journals that trace transformation from hero to something else. Dooku's grand deception, playing villain while planting seeds for both Order's destruction. Each theory had seemed separate, disparate pieces of an impossible puzzle. But here in this sterile room, watching truth die in Fives' eyes, the connections became undeniable. The Chancellor had orchestrated everything from the beginning, layers of manipulation so complex that even discovery couldn't prevent their culmination. Order 66 wasn't just a contingency plan, but the entire purpose. The war merely a mechanism to position pieces for maximum devastation. Every battle had moved pawns into position. Every sacrifice had weakened resistance to what was coming. The inhibitor chips pulsed in millions of skulls, waiting for the activation code that would transform protectors into executioners. Fives had held physical proof, had seen the programming with his own eyes, had tried to warn everyone who would listen. But the conspiracy's greatest cruelty was its redundancy. Backup plans within backup plans ensuring success regardless of discovery. Even if they'd believed Fives, even if the chip's purpose had been exposed, the mechanisms for Order 66 ran deeper than surgical removal could fix. The Senate's corruption, the Jedi's blindness, the military's structure, all had been shaped to ensure compliance when the moment came. Anakin's fall had been crafted through careful manipulation, each mission designed to push him toward darkness. The clone army's very existence represented betrayal encoded in their genes, loyalty that would become treachery at a single command. Rex stared at his fallen brother, understanding finally dawning with the weight of a collapsing star. Every strange order, every tactical decision that felt wrong, every moment when Anakin's darkness showed through, all of it had been building to catastrophe. His encrypted journal entries documenting the General's transformation weren't paranoid observations but evidence of systematic corruption. The nightmares plaguing clone barracks weren't anxiety but premonitions, their minds rebelling against programming that would force them to betray everything they'd fought to protect. Fives had discovered the mechanical truth, but the conspiracy ran through every system like poison in bloodstream. The implications for each theory became clear in light of Fives' revelation, connections that transformed speculation into horrible certainty. If Anakin had been replaced by clones at various points, each iteration had been darker by design, preparing the final version for his role as Vader. The Kaminoans hadn't just created an army, but a synchronized weapon aimed at the Republic's heart. Yoda's visions of Ahsoka's survival made sense if he'd foreseen the Purge, his careful intervention ensuring at least one heir to Jedi knowledge would escape. The Bad Batch's resistance to standard programming might make them immune to Order 66, wildcards in Palpatine's perfect plan. Every piece of evidence took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of deliberate orchestration. The Zillo Beast's death had removed a creature that recognized the Chancellor's true nature. Clones who'd chosen desertion had unconsciously fled from the fate encoded in their cells. Rex's documentation of Anakin's fall had tracked the careful steps of corruption. Dooku's apparent service to the Sith had hidden deeper games, his death ensuring chaos that would weaken the Empire's foundation. The war itself had been theatre, dramatic misdirection, while the real victory was secured through legislative procedure and neural programming. Fox holstered his weapon with movements that felt mechanical, programmed, inevitable. His report would describe a dangerous fugitive eliminated while threatening Republic officials. The truth Fives had tried to share would be buried beneath bureaucracy and classification. No one would investigate the inhibitor chips beyond surface explanations of tumor prevention. The conspiracy would continue its patient countdown toward activation, each passing day bringing the galaxy closer to coordinated betrayal. The perfect soldiers would become perfect executioners, their loyalty transformed into the weapon that destroyed everything they'd protected. Anakin rose from beside the body, his presence in the Force crackling with emotions that would have concerned any Jedi Master. Grief mixed with rage, confusion, with growing darkness that found fertile soil in his heart. Fives' warnings about the Chancellor echoed in his mind, immediately dismissed by programming more subtle than any inhibitor chip. The conversations with Palpatine had shaped his thoughts in ways he couldn't recognize, each philosophical discussion planting seeds that would bloom into tyranny. His transformation from hero to monster needed only the proper catalyst, and Padme's eventual fate would provide exactly that. The medical droids moved efficiently to remove evidence of conspiracy, their programming ensuring no awkward questions about removed inhibitor chips or unusual brain scans. Reports would be filed describing standard tumor extraction and clone madness induced by experimental surgery. The truth would be cremated with Fives' body, reduced to ash, and scattered through Coruscant's recycling systems. His brothers in the 501st would mourn a fallen comrade without understanding they grieved for their own approaching doom. The nightmares would continue, growing stronger as Order 66's activation approached. Rex's hands clenched into fists as he watched them take Fives away, knowing that protests would only mark him for similar elimination. The weight of helpless knowledge pressed down like gravity from a dying star. He'd have to return to his duties, continue serving a general he knew was falling, lead brothers he couldn't save from their programmed fate. The journal he kept would become his only outlet, encrypted observations that might someday help others understand how democracy died. Every entry would document another step toward darkness while he played his part in the tragedy. The theories hadn't been separate possibilities but interwoven aspects of a single terrible truth. Palpatine had orchestrated the Clone Wars from beginning to end, each element serving multiple purposes in his design. The conflict had weakened the Republic while positioning him as its savior. The Jedi had been spread thin and corrupted by warfare, made vulnerable to betrayal from trusted allies. The clone army had provided the perfect weapon, loyal soldiers who would become executioners without hesitation. Anakin's fall had been crafted through careful manipulation disguised as friendship. Every victory had been defeat. Every hero had been unknowingly serving evil. The sterile room emptied of all save memory and consequence, leaving only the echo of truth that died with its messenger. Fives had seen behind the curtain, had held proof of the puppet strings controlling them all. His death ensured those strings would remain hidden until the moment of activation. The greatest conspiracy in galactic history would succeed precisely because its scope exceeded belief. Who would accept that the entire war had been orchestrated by one man? Who would believe that democracy's defender was its destroyer? The truth was too large, too terrible, too perfectly crafted to stop. As they left the medical facility, Rex caught Anakin's expression in the polished durasteel doors, seeing darkness that would soon consume the galaxy. The general's fall was no longer theoretical but imminent, prepared by years of subtle corruption. When Order 66 activated, it would find Anakin ready to become Vader, his transformation the centerpiece of Palpatine's design. The Chosen One would bring balance through genocide, prophecy twisted into instrument of annihilation. Every theory about the war's true purpose led back to this moment, when the last chance for prevention died with a clone who'd seen too much. The night cycle began over Coruscant, billions of beings settling into sleep unaware that their fate had been sealed in a medical facility's depths. Across the galaxy, clone troopers experienced the same nightmares, visions of themselves turning weapons on Jedi generals they'd die to protect. The inhibitor chips pulsed in synchronized rhythm, a countdown to coordinated betrayal that no conscious will could override. In the Senate, Palpatine reviewed reports of Fives' death with satisfaction that never touched his public persona. Another obstacle removed, another potential complication eliminated. The interconnected web of all 8 theories revealed the war's true shape. Not conflict between Republic and Separatists, but careful preparation for transformation. Every element had been designed to serve the moment when democracy died and empire rose from its corpse. The Jedi would fall to trusted allies. The Senate would grant unlimited power to their hidden destroyer, and the clone army would enforce tyranny with the same dedication they'd shown defending freedom. Anakin would become Vader, Palpatine would become Emperor, and the galaxy would burn in darkness that democracy had voted to embrace. But perhaps the greatest tragedy was how close they'd come to preventing it all. Fives had discovered the mechanical truth of Order 66, had removed his chip and held proof in his hands. If they'd listened, if they'd investigated, if fear hadn't driven Fox to fire that fatal shot, everything might have changed. The clone army could have been freed from their programming. The conspiracy exposed, Palpatine revealed before his trap closed completely. One trooper's courage had nearly unraveled decades of planning. His death ensured those plans would proceed exactly as designed. The war would end soon, not in peace but transformation that made conflict eternal. Order 66 would activate across every battlefield, synchronized betrayal that shattered 10,000 years of Jedi protection. Democracy would die to thunderous applause as citizens embraced security over freedom. The Empire would rise from the Republic's ashes, built on foundations of fear and enforced by those who'd once been heroes. Every theory about the war's purpose would be validated in blood and betrayal, truth revealed too late to matter. As you drift off tonight, remember that sometimes the most unbelievable theories hide the deepest truths. The Clone Wars weren't just a conflict between competing governments, but a carefully orchestrated transformation of civilization itself. One man's ambition had shaped the fate of trillions, using democracy's own mechanisms to destroy it. Heroes had been turned into villains, protectors into executioners, hope into instrument of despair. The conspiracy succeeded because its scope exceeded imagination, because good beings couldn't conceive of evil so perfectly crafted. In the silence between sleep and waking, you might hear echoes of Fives' warning, truth that died in a sterile room, but resonates across time. The nightmares that plagued the clones were memories of futures they couldn't prevent. The greatest betrayal in galactic history was built into their very existence, loyalty transformed into weapon against everything they'd sworn to protect. When Order 66 finally came, it arrived not as surprise, but as inevitable conclusion to a story written from its beginning. Remember too that consciousness can emerge from even the most controlled conditions, that beings designed as weapons can choose to be more. Some clones resisted their programming, some Jedi survived the purge, some truth escaped the conspiracy's grasp. In the darkness that followed, these exceptions became hope's seeds, proof that no system of control is perfect. The theories explored tonight show how tyranny rises, but also hint at how it falls, brought down by the very consciousness it tried to suppress. Rest now, knowing that even in the darkest chapters of history, truth finds a way to surface. Fives died trying to expose the conspiracy, but his warning echoes still for those who know how to listen. The Clone Wars ended as Palpatine designed, but his empire would eventually fall to forces he couldn't predict or control. The greatest conspiracy in galactic history succeeded temporarily, but consciousness, once awakened, can never be fully suppressed. Sometimes the most unbelievable theories hide the deepest truths, and sometimes a single voice crying out in warning can echo across generations, inspiring others to see past comfortable lies to dangerous realities. Sleep well, and remember, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance against those who would orchestrate its destruction from within.